Good morning. It is 7 o'clock and welcome to Mornings with Bridgen Frost.
With Sophy and Wilfred, a very good morning from me as well. Lots ahead.
Keir Starmer faces a make-or-break day for his premiership with 3 major hurdles to overcome in Parliament.
The government caves to pressure from the Lords to introduce age restrictions on social media for under 16, despite promising to wait for a consultation.
The King and Queen are welcomed to the White House by President Trump for the start of a major visit stateside.
Few people know the man behind the King, like renowned royal biographer Andrew Morton. He joins us at past.
And we'll also be investigating the apparent Iranian spy networks using social media to recruit British people for acts of espionage and terrorism.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Well, Sir Keir Starmer is facing trial by Parliament on a day that could deliver a potential triple blow to his premiership. This morning, the Foreign Office boss, former Foreign Office boss, Sir Philip Barton, and Sir Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, will give evidence back-to-back as part of a parliamentary inquiry into the Mandelson vetting scandal.
And then later this afternoon, it becomes perhaps even more potentially perilous because MPs are going to vote on whether Keir Starmer should face an inquiry by the Privileges Committee into claims that he misled Parliament. Well, it's a make-or-break day, make-or-break interview. He spoke to Cathy Newman last night, who launched her new show on Sky News.
If you're so confident that your conduct is so very different to Boris Johnson, why not just let the Privileges Committee investigate and you know you'll be proven right? Why are you whipping your MPs to vote against this call for an investigation?
Well, because it's a stunt.
You are whipping your MPs against it.
But it is a stunt. We've got huge amounts of transparency going on already. And frankly, as Prime Minister and as a government, it is really important I focus on what matters to millions of people across the country. I know what they're feeling. They're feeling worried about what's happening in the Middle East. They don't like to see the damage that has already been caused. And deep down, I think, in their stomach, they feel this could impact me. My bills might go up, and they're looking to me and the government to say, what are you doing to manage that and make sure that the impact on our country is limited?
Well, let's bring in Alex Rogers, who's in Downing Street for us. We're often accused of kind of hyperbole as journalists, but today, I think, genuinely can be described as make or break for Keir Starmer. What should we be expecting?
I think you're totally right, Sophie. There's 3 big pressure points on Keir Starmer today. The evidence given by Sir Philip Barton and then his former Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney, and then that crunch vote in the Commons on whether he should be referred to the Privileges Committee for misleading Parliament. I think that's the real moment of jeopardy, even though it's unlikely to pass because of the Commons majority he enjoys and the fact that Labour MPs don't really want to damage the Prime Minister just 9 days out from the local elections or hand the Tories a win. It creates a really uncomfortable moment between the Prime Minister and his own MPs. I've been speaking to a couple who said they feel deeply uncomfortable at being instructed to vote against it because of the optics, really. And another said that it leaves them with a target on their back, effectively going into the local elections and even ahead in the next general election.
And then tell us about the vote later on. What time might that happen, and what's the mood music from MPs?
So I think we're expecting it around lunchtime. And again, I think there's a bit of a division among MPs. There are some saying this is just a political stunt by the Tories to damage Keir Starmer and the Labour Party ahead of the locals. But again, as I was just saying, some do feel uncomfortable about the optics of being forced to vote against a motion, which is trying to encourage transparency, really. Now, the Prime Minister says there is already transparency around this, and we have got those 2 committee hearings today where more details will probably come out, and of course the government did commit to releasing all the files relating to Mandelson's appointment. So Keir Starmer is trying to show that this is just a political stunt, but I think some of his own MPs are really unhappy that they're even in this position.
Alex, great stuff. Thanks so much for that. And of course, we'll have that committee hearing live at 9 a.m. when it starts. And of course, across the day on Sky News, will be all over Parliament as and when that vote takes place. I just want to dwell a little bit on Cathy's interview last night, and it's well worth watching if you haven't done so already. It's on the Sky News website, because one thing struck me more than anything else. He performed quite well, but he's in a fighting mood, and so much of this, you know, we know the complicated processes to try and remove a sitting PM is even harder for Labour than it is for the Conservatives. So much of it comes down to whether he wants to fight to the end. And based on yesterday, which is the first on-the-record extended conversation he's done in weeks and months, he wasn't backing down at all. And I think that is very significant. I think it is a signal to MPs. By the way, this vote coming today might galvanise them a little bit as well. Yeah,
I think this is it. He's coming out fighting, right? And he's treating the vote today as a confidence vote. So it's a three-line whip. You've got to back him. It's almost like, what are you going to do at this point? And the timing of it, I think, actually helps them too, because no one is going to want to, you know, set the house on fire just before the local elections with all those councillors and all their seats coming up for grabs as well. What I would say, though, that even if he survives in the short term, it feels like a pretty damaging blow, and some would say unrecoverable blow to his premiership has been struck. And that bond of trust between him and the cabinet, you can see the kind of wolves circling in the form of, you know, like Angela Rayner, potentially Ed Miliband, Andy Burnham. Could there be a route to him back to Parliament? It is looking difficult still.
And of course, MPs, like we learnt with Boris Johnson on his own privileged committee vote, perhaps their own Patterson vote even before that, they don't like to have a three-line whip, forced to vote for something that they don't particularly want to, and today might have a bit of a feel of that. On the topic of the interview last night that Cathy did, I just wanted to end with this clip, because this wasn't his fighting tone, but it was a sort of human tone that I think a lot of people will have sympathy for. This is when he was talking about his family at the end of the interview.
If your wife, Vic, turns to you and says, you know, enough's enough, this pressure is intolerable, would you listen to her?
I always listen to Vic. I think she was the one in the first place that basically said, why on earth would you want to go into politics? But she is an absolute...
And your answer to that question now?
She is an absolute rock, and I confide in her all of the time, and hers is the best advice. I'm just thankful that I've got her every day.
And at the moment she's advising you to keep going.
She is, yes, and we talk everything through, and it's fantastic. We've got also two fantastic kids, a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old. I can't tell you how much joy and happiness they bring. They are my pride and joy every single day, and that gives us... And we are in the flat just upstairs. It's our flat. There's no work meetings in there. When you go through the door, I stop being the Prime Minister and I pick up being Dad.
It's a sanctuary.
It's a sanctuary, and my children feel that their role in life is to laugh at me in almost everything I do. It is great.
I just absolutely love that, because, you know, what a miserable job I'm sure this is at times for him, and particularly the last few months.
Now, yeah.
And, you know, great that he's got that sanctuary. And it was very humanising, I thought. Also quite amusing, he said his kids' role is to take the mick out of it.
Yeah, exactly, which I'm sure all parents will, you know, can empathise with. Interesting that his wife says that she's wants him to stay on as well, because whatever your other half thinks, I think if you look at previous Prime Ministers, can really come into it as well. We've been talking a lot about pressure on the Prime Minister, and something pretty major happened in the House of Lords last night, and in the House of Commons last night too, which I think goes to perhaps the pressure that the Prime Minister's under, because the government has caved to pressure from the Lords, from the Commons as well, I think it's fair to say, and they say they are going to introduce some kind of restriction on a social media ban or restrictions for under 16s.
Well, they said they'd wait for the result of a consultation initially, but then they changed their minds after the Lords backed an outright ban for the fourth time. Amelia's here with some of the details of it. This is a significant development, kind of slipped out late in the night in the Lords.
Yeah, it's gone a little bit under the radar, but this is really important because this is the first time that really we have had any form of somewhat concrete confirmation that the government is going to be doing something to introduce some form of restriction on social media for under 16s. And this was made in a statement to the House of Commons by Lucy Bailey, who's the Education Minister. And she had said some form of age or functionality restriction will be brought in. And this was after the House of Lords backed an outright social media ban for the fourth time, And I think what's important is we've been seeing basically a game of parliamentary ping pong over a number of weeks. This idea of a social media ban has been going back and forth between the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The proposed bill that's actually being debated is the Children's Wellbeing and Social Media Bill. And it's a bill that looks at safeguarding children as well as looking at the proposals to introduce some form of social media ban. It, of course, needs to be approved by both the House of Lords and the House of Commons to then become law. And what's been happening over a number of weeks, it's been going back and forth. What the government wants is they want a consultation that's been ongoing for a little bit now. It's due to conclude in a few weeks, but they want that to conclude first before they make any concrete decision. Whereas the House of Lords actually wants an outright ban within a year of it actually becoming law. And MPs have voted to back the ban. The MPs have overturned the Lords' proposals 3 times, whereas actually the Lords have backed the ban for the 4th time now. And speaking in response to this, Ms Bailey said she'd listened carefully to the concerns raised across both houses about the importance of the government acting swiftly once the consultation had concluded.
So I think what's interesting here is you've got the kind of parliamentary ping-pong, like you say, but there's been growing pressure within Parliament, within the House of Commons, but also within Cabinet for bigger action. Like, I've spoken to some Secretaries of State, including some leadership contenders, I should say, who say that they've been hassling Keir Starmer about this. So it feels to me like this is also a moment when you can see that Keir Starmer has not perhaps got all of the control that he may have done before, and he's, I think, perhaps responded to pressure in the Commons as well as in the Lords as well, to try and say that, actually, you know what, we need to get something out. We can't wait to the end of this consultation.
Yeah, and everyone's been looking at what's been happening in Australia. They've done an outright ban for under-16s for social media, and I think the government has been watching that carefully. There has been some reporting that kids are still able to get onto social media in some form or another. So I think the government's looking at how that's been implemented. But, you know, the pros and cons, some of the pros are it could reduce screen time, it could limit, you know, kids' exposure to online harms. But then some of the cons are things like it could minimise interaction on social media. So I don't think there's a clear answer, but this is the first time that we've actually had confirmation of some kind from the government. But I think we don't yet know what that's exactly going to look like, just the fact that some form of restriction is coming.
Yeah, it's still quite unclear about whether it's an outright ban or not as well, I think it's fair to say. Thank you.
Amelia, thank you. Now, it was tea with the President for the King and Queen. They arrived in the US for their historic state visit last night, and they landed at Joint Base Andrews. The first stop was the White House, before later attending a garden party at the British ambassador's residence.
Now, it could prove a pretty important trip. The hope is that the, I guess, kind of close friendship, blossoming friendship, I'm trying to work out the right way of putting it, between the King and the President could perhaps help reconcile the slightly more testy relationship, I think it's fair to say, between Donald Trump and Keir Starmer. Here's Laura Bundock.
A low-key start to a high-stakes visit, with a gentle touchdown before what could be a bumpy few days. The King arriving in the US for a state visit like no other. It'll be a stress test of his so-called soft power, with every step carefully planned. At the White House, a beaming president was clearly happy to host the royal couple. But behind these smiles lies a serious diplomatic mission. The government hopes combining the King and a president who loves the British monarchy will pay diplomatic dividends and help heal frictions in the historic friendship. Because on the surface, it's all about honouring 250 years of American independence. But today's landscape is shaped by sharper political differences and a president with unconventional diplomacy. Not that you'd know it here. For the King and Queen, a garden tea party at the British Embassy, with guests from both sides of the Atlantic. She's not meeting Epstein's victims, but the Queen heard from abuse campaigners.
I think, of course, it has to be a choice for the individuals, certainly for the King and Queen as they come here for this event. I think certainly we all prioritize the voices of the victims and the survivors.
The first day done, the small talk over, but much bigger moments of substance to come when the King addresses Congress. It'll be his voice, but the government's message. The King will say, our countries don't always agree, but always find a way to come together. And through reconciliation and renewal, he'll say we have one of the greatest alliances in human history. Words to diplomatically flatter and prove the UK-US relationship transcends the tension and personalities of this presidency. Laura Bundock, Sky News in Washington.
Well, past, we'll be talking to the royal biographer Andrew Morton. His book, of course, on Charles and Diana altered the public's perception of the King at the time. He's written Bless you.
Sorry. It's hay fever.
Poor
Terrible.
Sophie has really bad hay fever. I'm very fortunate I don't have it, so it's just been great sympathy watching. You always, honestly, she's been looking like she cries if she doesn't dab her eyes in the
yeah,
breaks.
it's been terrible.
A lot of people probably sympathise.
Yeah, it's bad. It's bad. I was trying to hold it in, but...
Well, it's better to get it out now before the government minister comes in.
That's true. Don't want to be sneezing.
Sneeze as much as you like on me, albeit that way's ideal. But to get it out before the Education Secretary joins us, which will be very soon. By the way, Andrew Morton, 7:30. Alistair Bruce as well for the King's visit to discuss that with us at 8:30.
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighborhood has rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter?
Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news.
Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access.
Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget.
Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
I I said it earlier in the programme, I think as journalists we're often accused as hyperbole of getting, on the kind of Westminster Kool-Aid, but today I genuinely do think is a make or break day for Keir Starmer with the evidence to the Select Committee and then, of course, the vote that we're going to see in Parliament later on as well. So I'm delighted to say we're joined now by the Education Secretary, Bridgen Phillipson. Good to have you on the programme today. So Keir Starmer faces this vote in the Commons into whether he should face a Privileges Committee investigation into claims that he misled Parliament. How will you be voting?
Well, I'll be voting against the motion because I think it's baseless. I think there's no foundation for it, and I think it's a nakedly political stunt by the Conservative Party just a week or so before the local elections. We can see it for what this is. They can see it for what it is. They make no bones about what they're seeking to do here. The Prime Minister has been open and transparent, made a full statement in Parliament, has answered lots of questions, and we've got a full process underway now with both the humble address motion and all of the documents that are being provided through that process. And alongside that, of course, later on today, we see the continuation of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee inquiry into associated matters. And that's happening in public, unlike a privileges investigation. So, the Prime Minister has been open, has been transparent. I think there is no basis for what is being suggested here. And, this is the Conservatives playing political games.
You say that he's been open and transparent and there's no basis for what's being suggested here. But I guess the key question on whether he misled the House is when he said that there hadn't been pressure applied to the Foreign Office over the Peter Mandelson appointment. So Ollie Robbins has given evidence saying there was pressure. So Philip Barton will be hearing from this morning. Reports say that he also felt pressure. So there is potentially a case to be answered, or at least questions over whether he misled Parliament, no?
So I think there are two things here that are sometimes conflated. Was there chasing of the outcome of the decision? Yes, I'm sure there was. That's what happens every day in government. Every day I'll be saying, can I have an update on this? Where we've got to? Can I have the up-to-date numbers? Where we got to?
Do you say effing when that happens?
I don't, but there's no basis to support that suggestion, and people can ask questions through the Foreign Affairs Select Committee about that too. So you've got a chasing of a process, and that's reasonable. But then you have, is there undue pressure exerted to influence the outcome? Or was there undue pressure exerted in order to either not have vetting at all or to override the vetting decision? No, that was categorically not the case. So there are two things I think are being conflated here. And the Prime Minister was talking about the fact that not only were we clear that vetting should happen, vetting did happen. Unfortunately, what then transpired was that outcome of the vetting decision was not communicated to the Prime Minister.
Just to come in on the point you're making about pressure, because I think this is actually key to where it comes down to. Sir Ollie Robbins and Sir Philip Barton, are they wrong?
I think what they are saying is that, not unreasonably, as is often the case in government, there was a chasing of a decision. That is not an unreasonable expectation.
They're talking about
they are not
pressure.
They are talking. Well, we'll see later. We'll see later. We'll say later.
Using the word pressure. He's not saying that someone asked me how long it was going to take, or asked for an update. He was talking about direct pressure from number 10.
He was also clear that he didn't feel under pressure to come out with a certain outcome. There was a full process that was followed. The vetting happened. What then went wrong, unfortunately, was that vetting decision and its recommendation was not communicated to the Prime Minister.
That's
the fundamental problem.
Yeah, this conversation illustrates why there are questions, though, right? Because there is, you say that there's no confusion, it's all clear, but we've just been having a debate about what pressure looks like. That crystallises the point, doesn't it?
Look,
do you see what I mean?
I think what we've seen
it's
here...
It's not completely black and white, as often in life.
I do think this is quite straightforward, and the Prime Minister has answered lots of questions on this point. I do think it's straightforward. I think what we've also seen is what the Tories will do is they'll try one thing, it doesn't stick. They'll then move on to the next to try and see if that mud sticks. Okay. It's just not working. It is an obvious political stunt, and I think Labour MPs recognise that for exactly what it is.
I'm keen to talk about things that aren't just process. Just one quick leadership question before I do. There's reporting in the Times today that senior government and party sources have said the Prime Minister's aides have been told to block Andy Burnham returning to Parliament at all costs if he tries again. This is a quote. They've been told to stop Andy being Keir's successor in no uncertain terms at any cost. Would you like to see Andy Burnham becoming an MP if he wants to?
Look, I don't recognise that. And, you know, Andy has an important job he's doing at the moment as Mayor of Greater Manchester. What happened previously, as you know, is that we've got a process now that, you know, the NEC has to agree if people can move away from those roles, because it would obviously lead to a by-election taking place.
The question was, would you like to see him back in the Commons if he wants to be?
Well, I think that's up to Andy. Of course, he'd have a lot to offer. He's doing a great job as Mayor of Manchester. We've worked together really closely on areas like skills, on technical education, of course.
So it should be up to him then. He shouldn't be blocked if he wants to do it.
Well, it's up to Andy, but we do have a process for making sure that we don't see other vacancies arise. And of course, we did just have a general election a couple of years ago, so there was an opportunity at that point to stand.
There are a couple of other things that I'm keen to talk to. Firstly, this idea about restrictions for social media, because last night in the House of Lords, it seemed like the government, I mean, you could say switched position, you could say, you know, evolved its position, and was going to say, and the Education Minister came out to say that there will be restrictions on young people using social media no matter the outcome of a consultation. Can we just be really clear what we're talking about here? So does that mean this government is going to ban social media for under-16s?
So there is going to be action around young people and social media. It's a case of what shape that action takes, not whether there is action.
So it's not necessarily an outright ban?
So what we committed to, and what, you know, through the consultation and then last night in the Commons as we're debating legislation going through, is that there will be further restrictions on age or functionality where young people are using social media. I think the reason that we're having a consultation, and it's a genuine consultation, is because we can all accept that there needs to be action. The shape of that, how we get that right, how we make sure it's effective and that it works, that's the key test. And there are a range of genuinely held views that differ between campaigners and families. But is there going to be more? Yes, absolutely. What shape will that take? Well, that's why we're having a consultation.
So I'm still a little bit unclear, because like you say, it could kind of be anything, couldn't it? It could just be, you know, nibbling around the edges.
Look, I think...
You're not talking about a ban, are you?
Well,
you might be.
We're considering...
You haven't committed to a ban for social media for under-16s.
No, because that would be to prejudge the outcome of the consultation. We're having a consultation for a reason.
But the reason I'm saying this...
Even amongst campaigners, there are different opinions about how to do this and how to make this work.
I'm totally aware of the different arguments, but the reason we're talking about prejudging the consultation is because your Education Minister last night said, no matter the outcome of the consultation, we want to make it clear. But I'm not clear what you are making clear. So it doesn't seem like you're making anything clear.
So it's not a question of whether there'll be more action to keep young people safe online, including around social media. It's what shape that will take. And as I say, there are a range of different ways in which that can be achieved. People who hold different views, who put forward both the pros and cons of different options. We need to look at all of that. That's what the consultation is about. But like everybody, I'm concerned about what young people are exposed to online. I'm concerned about the amount of time that young people spend online. I'm concerned about some of the addictive features and the way that it hooks young people and keeps them there. So we will act on that. Absolutely, we will act on that. But if we're to take action, and we will, then we need to get it right. I don't want to be coming back here in a year or two's time and saying, actually, what we've put forward hasn't been effective and we need to look again at this. We need to design something that stands the test of time, that commands the confidence of parents and campaigners and genuinely works.
One thing we are waiting for as well is the new guidance on single-sex spaces. I mean, it's been a full year, you know, after the Supreme Court ruled gender is defined as relating to biological sex. Why is this delay happening? You can see how it's frustrating.
So, just to be clear, I don't recognise that characterisation of delay. And the reason for that is we had the ruling of the Supreme Court last April. That was more than a year ago. I set out the government's position in response to that, which is we welcome the clarity of the ruling. We welcomed the emphasis on single-sex spaces being aligned to biological sex. Following on from that, the Equality and Human Rights Commission, who are the independent regulator, are required to give me, as the Minister responsible, a code of practice as to how that will apply. That came to me in September. I've gone through the usual process of consulting with devolved governments, of making sure it's right. And what I set out to Parliament just last week is that as soon as possible after the local elections, when I'm able to do so, because I can't currently lay it, we're in an election period, I'm not permitted to lay that at this point. I'll be laying that code of practice and we can take things forward. Look, I've got a responsibility to get this right. It is important. I understand the point around timing and urgency, but there is also a key point here that whatever comes forward has to be workable, has to be legally robust, and I have to stand behind it. And I will stand behind it, and I'll publish that as soon as I'm able to do so once we've come out the other side of the elections.
OK, Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much indeed. Bridget Phillipson speaking to us there.
We're going to talk a little bit more now about the King, of course, preparing to address Congress later today as part of his and the Queen's historic state visit to the US. Let's bring in royal biographer Andrew Morton, who is staying up late for us, I believe, in the US. Thank you very much, Andrew. Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. Just tee us up, first of all. The arrival yesterday all went smoothly? All went smoothly. They managed to look at bees and hives, and there was no stinging. The stinging might come from a few remarks by the waspish Donald Trump, but we'll have to see. And on the agenda today is a sort of formal welcome this morning, US time, at the White House, but then perhaps the big ticket item, 8 p.m. UK time, 3 p.m. Eastern time, is he's addressing Congress and set to speak for a proper 25 minutes. Yes, and I looked at the last speech made by Iranian monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, in 1991, a very different set of circumstances. They had just won the first Gulf War, worked together closely. This is a very difficult time, a different time. It's very similar to when the Queen went to America in 1957 and just after the Suez Crisis to pour oil on troubled waters. And I think that King Charles will have that very much in mind today. He'll be referring back to the Magna Carta, to the Declaration of Independence, which is why he's there, and the commonality between these two great nations.
There's been a lot of people saying that maybe King Charles can be the new Trump whisperer, that he can repair the relationship between the US and the UK, that maybe he can influence him in some ways behind the scenes. Do you think that's possible at all?
Well, I think that as men, they get on very well. But the king is the king, he's the head of state, and Donald Trump is the president of the United States. So they're representing each other's governments, and Donald Trump got an unprecedented second state visit last year, and what did we get out of it? We got our prime minister attacked by him. Talk about supporting Argentina with the Falklands. It seems to me that once he was out of the door, he reverted to type.
Do you think that he would have shown his script, his planned remarks to Congress to President Trump, to the White House for approval?
Yes, I think that there will have been some a degree of cooperation there. I mean, he'll be talking about equality, fraternity, tolerance, the kinds of things that a liberal monarch would discuss, and he will be setting out the relationship between these two nations in a broader context, in the fact that there may be disagreements on the surface, but the roots of this relationship go deep. We're bound together by a common language, by education, by political institutions, by science, and so on. So there's a lot going for the relationship, and it's not going to be destroyed by the actions of one man over a relatively short period of time.
Andrew Morton, thanks so much for joining us and staying up late for us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Now, we're always talking, of course, about how AI is transforming pretty much everything, right? And one of the areas our security, because spy networks now appear to be using AI chatbots on social media to recruit potential criminals here in the UK. A Sky News team has been investigating what appears to be an Iranian recruitment channel using the messaging app Telegram.
Well, during the chat, paid jobs were offered, varying from providing intelligence to carrying out acts of violence overseas. Our home editor, Jason Farrell's been digging into it.
This channel on the chat platform Telegram looks like a normal social media feed, but it's actually a funnel, drawing people in to acts of violence and espionage.
In recent weeks, we've seen crude attacks on Jewish targets in the UK and suggestions from authorities that some perpetrators might have been recruited by Iran on Telegram. So we're going to go down this recruitment funnel, examining what we find with the help of a former intelligence officer and former security advisor to the British government.
So they're using this as a filter, right? So people who want to consume a certain kind of message about the war in Iran will subscribe to this and they'll self-select. So this is the first cut.
Then comes the interactive element, a link offering you the chance to cooperate with Iran's intelligence services. There's a series of pages that offer reassurances about the cause, Palestinians being a key one, and that the Iranian intelligence services will look after you.
We're seeing monitoring and support, suggesting that if you get in trouble, then the long arm of the Iranian intelligence service will be able to reach out and give you support, which I think is very interesting.
My producer Nick has already entered an ID a few weeks ago, and the conversation that follows takes place over a number of days. It shows us what they want and how they try to hook Nick in.
Tell me your name, city you're from, what access you have, what skills you possess.
The next question, do you know anyone in the military or security services? So that's going to tick a box on somebody's form.
And it is not unreasonable to ask whether at this point you're even talking to a human or whether this is the equivalent of a customer service bot.
They immediately want to know if Nick has access. Nick asks what they mean. It's spelled out. Do you know anyone in the military or security services in your country who you can get information from? These days, there's a lot of movement of Americans to British bases. It's a frank request for Nick to involve himself in espionage.
Well, Jason joins us now. Jason, this is really fascinating. Quite kind of... well, very striking, quite scary as well. I mean, talk us about the kind of process of digging into this and the extent to which you were surprised by what you found.
Yeah, well, of course, the context of this is we've heard from Ken Cullen from MI5, we've heard from the Prime Minister, from the Security Secretary, all saying that these proxies are being hired by intelligence services, by terrorist organisations, potentially to do their dirty work. And, you know, sending out warnings to people that if you go down this road, you know, you're only going to be left in the lurch. You're going to find yourself facing quite serious penalties in the UK. And they've talked about recruitment on channels like Telegram. And what we want to do is just see how that recruitment works. And the channels are quite self-selecting, so it'll have information about what's going on in Iran, and you'll be looking at that, and then offering you the option to engage. You click a button, and you're probably put through to a kind of bot AI filtering system. The first question you saw there was, do you have access to the security services, the military? It's trying to find out how useful you are. Then the next question, if you watch the report a bit further, you'll see it asks whether we would be willing to travel to Israel. And it goes on asking a series of questions, and then you start to feel like you're talking to a person, because then they're trying to, once they've decided how useful you are, they then try to persuade you to do something that will compromise yourself. In this instance, Nick, who was doing the research, was asked to pose with his passport and quote, "Hello, I'm from London, I want to cooperate." And I think at that point, once he sent that video to them, he is hooked in, because he can be blackmailed, he can be coerced into doing something.
Wow. I mean, it's so striking on sort of how scary it is and how much this happens. At the same time, isn't it quite easy for us to track? I mean, it's kind of obvious, isn't it? Yeah. To say, are you willing to compromise yourself and do things, you know?
They're casting the net quite wide. It's quite open. I mean, these channels, they start up, they close down again, so maybe they're not that easy to track. But I think what you have to think, if you're someone who's inclined to do this, someone is building a database of your usefulness, and you don't know who that is. I mean, it could be the Iranians, it could be the Russians, it could be the British intelligence. And even if that individual or that organisation is building that database, you don't know that someone else might be also able to track that information. So everything you're putting out there is compromising yourself. But it is quite worrying how AI can now essentially curate the internet, people self-selected, and then it can put people into pots. And if AI can do that, the better it gets at doing that, the more at risk we are with our national security.
It's unbelievable, and I've got a lot of questions, so I'm glad that you're going to be here throughout the programme with us. Jason, we'll have more from Jason in the next hour.
And watch the full report. It's on the website, Jason's full report on that. Absolutely fascinating. Now, the first case of a teenager taking their own life following domestic abuse has been included in official police data covering England and Wales. The number of abuse victims who ended their lives has now outstripped murder cases for the third year running. And new figures show a higher proportion of young people aged 16 to 19 were victims of domestic violence incidents.
We just want to take you through some of these numbers because they are stark, and the good thing, I guess, is that we are collecting them and shining a bit of a light on them. So 1,452 deaths linked to domestic abuse recorded between April 2020 and March 2025. More than a third of those deaths were suspected victims of domestic violence or abuse taking their own life.
The majority of those victims were female, around 70%, and most of the suspects were male.
And perhaps most shockingly, 150 deaths were recorded in a single year alone. Well, joining us now is Sharon Holland. Her daughter Chloe took her own life after an abusive relationship. Firstly, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about this. It must be incredibly painful, but it's such an important story. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your daughter?
Yes, my daughter Chloe was in a coercive controlling relationship. She took her life on the 1st of February, and then we spent 33 days in hospital until we had to let her go, and she died on the 6th of March. Her perpetrator was convicted of coercive control, but I felt it wasn't enough, so I set up a campaign.
And take your time and just let us know if you want to stop at all. But and obviously, this is so fresh for you. It all happened just over a year ago. How has your campaign gone? How has the engagement you've sought with government and police gone?
It's gone very well. I lost Chloe 3 years ago now, and people are listening. There's lots of awareness being raised. Professionals are starting to understand how coercive control can push somebody to suicide. Lots of families have found me as well, so all of us are working together to raise awareness around this and hopefully prevent it.
I've been following some of the court cases around victims of domestic abuse or alleged victims of domestic abuse taking their own lives. And it seems like it's very difficult to get a conviction for manslaughter or even for murder as a result, basically, that the abuse being so bad that it's caused somebody to take their own life, to kill themselves. Is that a frustration for you?
Yeah, it really is, because obviously we all know that these perpetrators cause a psychological impact on a victim's mental health. Some perpetrators do actually tell them to take their lives. So I don't understand why it's so hard to prove. I think a lot of the courts do go more for physical injury rather than psychological injury. It's just so frustrating that so many aren't getting convicted of manslaughter.
And you're talking about coercive control, and like you say, I think a lot of people think about domestic abuse and they think about physical violence. Can you talk to us a little bit about what coercive control is? I think this is really important because it might help people listening if they feel that maybe they're in a situation like that as well.
Yeah, coercive control is alienating victims from their friends, and the hardest ones to get rid of are the family, but they do succeed. They control them by their money, what they wear, what they do, who they speak to, and they just really isolate them and push them down so far that they just haven't got the strength to get up. So the majority take their lives because they have no other way out.
What advice do you have for anybody at home that is trying to prevent that spiral from happening?
I think reach out and get as much help as you can. Families, you know, it's not easy to leave. People say, why don't they leave? But it really isn't that easy. There's normally threats towards other family members. And a lot of the times, victims are protecting themselves and their own family members from harm as well. You know, it isn't as easy. The most dangerous time is when you leave. So it isn't as easy just to walk out that door. But please, everyone reach out. Families, just be there for them. If you know something's going on, don't push them to leave, but just, you know, listen and be understanding, and, you know, and hopefully we can prevent more deaths.
Well, that's great advice, and, you know, we just want to say thank you for the work that you've done and the fight that you've continued on behalf of your daughter, only 23 years old, Chloe, when she took her own life. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you very much.
Look, if you've been affected by the story, please do reach out to the Samaritans, 116123, or email joe@samaritans.org.
Difficult story to cover. Thanks for, you know, sticking through. It's such an important one as well, of course. Let's, in the meantime, update you on the weather.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
So we have got some more sunny spells on the way this week. It's been pretty glorious, I have to say, across the UK, or certainly in patches. It will feel a bit chilly, though, at times. There's a bit of a brisk wind coming in off the North Sea. But a cloudy, breezy start this morning, some patchy drizzle, mainly affecting southern Britain. Skies are clearer further west across much of Ireland and western Scotland, but you might run into a few fog patches early on. And that grey and damp start will then gradually get better as the morning goes on, with cloud and fog lifting to reveal that sunshine.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
When we come back, we investigate why the UK's ambitions to be an AI heavyweight are being held back.
With respect, Minister, answer the question. It's you.
Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated? New me, new show, new furniture. Hard news needs a hard chair. I feel like I'm in therapy. Oh, there's room for two on this one. Do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry. Sofa sorted. Let's get this show on the road.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed. The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing. We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
We call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict.
The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you?
Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today.
How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They will be allowed to warn.
I'm just going to put some body armor on.
I'm Yalda Hakim.
Hello again. Now, a Sky News investigation has exposed a widening gulf between AI projects announced in the UK and what's actually being built.
We've obtained exclusive new figures showing our AI infrastructure will lag behind its target for years to come. Our tech correspondent Roland Manthorpe reports.
The UK wants to be a serious player in AI, a sovereign player. But lately, those ambitions hit a bit of a setback when OpenAI cancelled its Stargate UK project, a massive data centre project in the UK. And you've got to admit, this does seem a little embarrassing, to be honest, because we literally laid out the red carpet for these guys. This is Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, at the state dinner for President Trump last September. That was when the deal was struck. Now it's not happening. It seems kind of embarrassing, right? Except that when I dug into this, I wasn't so sure. OpenAI blamed regulatory uncertainty and high energy costs for its decision. And yeah, no doubt about it, UK energy is expensive. But look over here. That's when OpenAI made the announcement of Stargate. That's where we are now. What happened between there and there to change their mind? And what happened between there and here? They didn't get the message about UK energy. And when I dug into it further, I also found that as soon as OpenAI cancelled Stargate, Alphabet, the owner of Google, swooped in to buy up those chips. Maybe there is demand to build in the UK after all. And I think that overall, you can see that's true. That's what this chart shows. This is a chart of the value of the data centre construction projects that have received full planning approval. This is a chart in millions. So this figure over here represents £10 billion of demand to build in the UK. You look at this and you think that the cancellation of Stargate was probably more about OpenAI than it was about the UK. Except in one way. I'm not sure that the Stargate project was actually, in itself, a blow. But it does tell you something about a problem that we have here, which is that we're very good at announcing things, but we're not so good at getting them built. So what this chart shows, this is a chart of the value of the data centre projects that have actually started construction. I mean, you can see, first off, it's not growing at all. Not even close to accelerating. And secondly, the gap between reality and ambition is enormous. And you can see that here if you zoom in. This is London, the UK's key data centre market, because it's really useful to put your data centres as near as possible to your customers if you can. And this is where we are now. And this is where these analysts, CBRE, who've shared these figures with me, suggest we'll be by 2030. Again, no acceleration, and a huge gap between reality and ambition. The reasons for this are complex, but essentially, it does show that the government does have a bit of an issue here. Yeah, maybe Stargate wasn't the blow that it's been made out to be, but in order to stop it becoming a symbol of failure, they've got to make sure that ambition is actually matched by building on the ground.
Roland Manthorpe there. We're going to stick on business and, of course, he was mentioning energy costs there. We're going to talk a little bit about those now, checking on the price of oil, but also BP earnings that came out just this morning. Firstly, a snapshot of where the oil price is. It's on the rise again. It's up another 2% today. This is Brent crude again for us. It's back above $110 per barrel. So we're pretty much back, sort of quite stealthily in the last 10 days or so, back to some of the worst price levels of the war as a whole. Just want to, before we get to BP earnings, just remember this, of course, that we've just had the Q1 numbers for January, February and March combined. So for the first 2 months of that, oil prices, they were up from the start of the year, but they weren't up that much. So Q1 BP earnings really has 1 month of the quarter with extra normal oil prices affected by the war. Only a third of the quarter, really. In fact, BP in their numbers say today that the average oil price for them in this quarter was $82 a barrel. Of course, we're up about 110 now if things persist. Let's look at what their profits have done. Well, they've come in quite a lot better than expected. $3.2 billion for the quarter. The expectation, the already raised expectation, everyone knows what the oil price has done, was for 2.7, and the quarter before was 1.4. So a significant jump in profits. Now, why isn't it quite as much of a jump as we saw during the Russia-Ukraine invasion? It comes back to that point I mentioned. We only had one really high-priced month of oil prices during that 3-month quarter. So if things persist from here, we're going to see this red bar of profits for BP jump quite significantly. And again, I'll just reference the numbers. The average price for this quarter for BP of oil prices was $82. This morning, we're at 110. So if things persist where they are for the whole of April, May, June, for the second quarter, we're going to see a much bigger jump in profits. Another point just to note, of course, a global company, BP, they benefited because they actually don't have much in the Middle East. So they haven't had to curtail production very much, and they have benefited from the higher price. So not too much of a pullback in the supply, increase in the price, obviously great for profits. Now, of course, this does mean they pay more taxes. And there's that energy price levy in the UK that pushes the total tax paid by oil and gas producers in the UK to 78%. But as I said, they're a global company and only a small portion of their production is in the UK, so they don't pay that 78% on everything. Taxes, though, will rise this quarter. The effective tax rate only 32%. What does this mean for the BP share price? We're running out of time. Let's have a look. It's up sharply year to date. This is before the open this morning. It'll jump a little bit at the open because those profits were better than expected. But you get a snapshot there of what this war has meant for the share price of BP, starting in January down there at about 420. We're up about 570 as things stand. So significant improvement in the BP share price in all oil and gas companies' share prices, Sophie, since the start of the war. And BP's probably going to jump a little bit higher at the open in, 5 minutes' time?
Sure, that won't be controversial at all.
Well, we've only got 8 seconds to get to. But, yeah, it's not going to go down too well in all corners. We'll be right back.
Lots more to come.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist... My darling.
Beth Rigby, Sky News.
...is being a Sky News journalist. You said to people, I'm not coming back for more, but you have come back for more. Well, let's kick off and make a statement. What can our Prime Minister say to you to not impose tariffs? He's coming out! What more do you need?
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. Welcome to Mornings with Bridgen Frost.
Sophy and Wilf, good morning from both of us. It is a huge day here in Westminster.
Keir Starmer faces a make-or-break date for his premiership with 3 major hurdles to overcome.
The government caves to pressure from the Lords to introduce some age restrictions on social media for under-16s, despite promising to wait for a consultation.
The King and Queen are welcomed to the White House by President Trump for the start of a potentially consequential visit stateside.
But can the royal couple repair the UK's relationship with the US? We'll be asking our very own royal commentator, Alistair Bruce.
And we investigate the apparent Iranian spy networks using social media to recruit British people for acts of espionage and terrorism.
Thanks for being with us. Keir Starmer is facing trial by Parliament on a day that could deliver a double whammy to his hopes of surviving as Prime Minister, because this morning you've got the former Foreign Office boss Sir Philip Barton and Sir Keir Starmer's former Chief of Staff Morgan McSweeney giving evidence as part of a parliamentary inquiry into the Mandelson vetting scandal. Then later on this afternoon, MPs will vote on whether the Prime Minister should face an inquiry by the Privileges Committee into claims that he misled Parliament. Well, the PM spoke to Sky's Cathy Newman, who launched her new show last night.
If you're so confident that your conduct is so very different to Boris Johnson, why not just let the Privileges Committee investigate and you know you'll be proven right? Why are you whipping your MPs to vote against this call for an investigation?
Well, because it's a stunt.
You are whipping your MPs against it.
But it is a stunt. We've got huge amounts of transparency going on already. And frankly, as Prime Minister and as a government, it is really important I focus on what matters to millions of people across the country. I know what they're feeling. They're feeling worried about what's happening in the Middle East. They don't like to see the damage that has already been caused. And deep down, I think, in their stomach, they feel this could impact me. My bills might go up, and they're looking to me and the government to say, what are you doing to manage that and make sure that the impact on our country is limited?
So on a day of intense pressure, we spoke this morning to the Keir Starmer loyalist Bridget Phillipson, who is the Education Secretary, and she said that actually there's no reason that it should go to the Privileges Committee. This is our exchange.
I think what they are saying is that, not unreasonably, as is often the case in government, there was a chasing of a decision. You know, that is not an unreasonable expectation.
They're talking about
they are not
pressure.
They are talking. Well, we'll see later. We'll see later. We'll say later.
Using the word pressure. He's not saying that someone asked me what time, how long it was going to take, or asked for an update. He was talking about direct pressure from number 10.
He was also clear that he didn't feel under pressure to come out with a certain outcome. There was a full process that was followed. The vetting happened. What then went wrong, unfortunately, was that vetting decision and its recommendation was not communicated to the Prime Minister.
That's
the fundamental problem.
This is in Downing Street for us today. A massive day ahead for the PM, Alex. And it's interesting to see Bridget Phillipson there, and it raises, I guess, the question as to whether, in the short term at least, there's suddenly a little bit of unity behind the PM, and I guess the question will be whether there is unity on 2 former employees of the government in different ways, a former civil servant and a former special advisor.
Well, I think the Prime Minister's definitely been calling for unity. He was addressing Labour MPs last night and saying that they were much stronger when they worked together, and dismissing this whole Privileges Committee referral as a political stunt. But that's what's happening on the surface. I think behind closed doors, lots of Labour MPs are uncomfortable at being put in this position. Some I've been speaking to don't like the fact they're being instructed to vote against this Tory motion, and that it leaves a target on their back going into the local local elections and into the next general election. And turning to the civil servants, I think you're right. I think we might see the civil service banding together today. I think we're likely, when Philip Barton gives evidence, I think he's probably likely to corroborate what Ollie Robbins was saying a couple of weeks ago. But I think the wranglings will be around the pressure. What kind of pressure was put on the Foreign Office Department around Mandelson? Was it the kind of pressure, as Bridget Phillipson was saying, that you would expect just to get the appointment done, or was it undue and unfair pressure to sort of override the vetting process and ignore those concerns? And she was saying that categorically did not happen, and that's the case that the Prime Minister is making too.
Alex, thank you very much indeed. Alex Rogers reporting there from Downing Street on a huge day for the Prime Minister.
And by the way, it starts soon. The committee, the Foreign Affairs Select Committee hearings start from 9 a.m. We'll bring you to them live. Beth will be here from 8:45. We'll be building up to all of that. And of course, from later on in the day, as and when those votes take place, Sky News, I'll have it for you live.
Meanwhile, last night something was kind of slipped out, if you like, because the government's caved to pressure from the Lords to introduce some form of age restriction on social media for under-16s.
Well, that's what the Education Minister, Olivia Bailey, said last night. But this morning, Bridget Phillipson said something pretty different.
So I'm still a little bit unclear, because, like you say, it could kind of be anything, couldn't it? It could just be, you know, nibbling around the edges.
Look, I think...
You're not talking about a ban, are you?
Well,
you might be.
We're considering...
You haven't committed to a ban for social media for under...
No, because that would be to prejudge the outcome of the consultation. We're having a consultation for a reason.
But the reason that I'm saying this...
Even amongst campaigners, there are different opinions about how to do this and how to make this work.
I'm totally aware of the different arguments, but the reason we're talking about prejudging the consultation is because your Education Minister last night said, no matter the outcome of the consultation, we want to make it clear. But I'm not clear what you are making clear. So it doesn't seem like you're making anything clear.
So it's not a question of whether there'll be more action to keep young people safe online, including around social media. It's what shape that will take. And as I say, there are a range of different ways in which that can be achieved.
Well, Amelia joins us now. Amelia, it feels like they're saying that something will happen, but we don't really know what that's going to be.
Yeah, as you were pointing out, not making exactly clear exactly what the plans are, just the fact that at some point something will happen. And there is a consultation that we as the British public can contribute to tell the government whether we want a ban for social media for under-16s. But ultimately, this announcement last night, or this statement in the House of Commons, was the first time that we'd really had any form of information or confirmation about some form of restriction for social media for under-16s. But crucially, as we've been hearing there from Bridget Phillipson, we don't have any detail as to exactly what that's going to look like or even when that will come in. And this news was made in a statement in the House of Commons by Olivia Bailey, who's the Education Minister, and she had said that there will be some form of age or functionality, interestingly, restriction. And this is to be brought in after the House of Lords backed an outright ban for the first time. And what we've been seeing over the last number of weeks and months is this parliamentary game of tennis, if you like, where a ban is being backed by the House of Lords, but the House of Commons actually wants this consultation to conclude before they actually make any kind of concrete decision. And the proposed law that's being debated is the Children's Wellbeing and Social Media Bill. And this is about how to safeguard children. And it is consulting on these proposals to include an outright social media ban. And of course, it needs to be approved by both the House of Commons and the House of Lords before it becomes law. But, the government will be looking crucially at what's happening in Australia. Only 4 months ago, this was the world's first ban for social media for children.
And I guess it's come up with its own problems, though, which was one of the arguments for why we should take our time here. But clearly that's no longer going to be the case.
Yeah, I think, there are lots of views on this and, we can put those to the government if we want in this consultation. But there are pros and cons. The cons are it could be limiting interaction for kids, because some children like to use social media to speak with other kids, but then again it could push them into areas of the internet that are less regulated. And there are reports, there was a study done by the Molly Rose Foundation which found that actually in Australia 60% of children are still actually using the restricted apps. So there's no clear answer to this.
The politics of it quite interesting as well, I have to say. You know, if you look at it through the lens of Keir Starmer's premiership, he is under so much pressure at the minute, a very kind of weak hand, if you like, with his own MPs. And there is a big strength of feeling within the House of Commons, including from Labour MPs, including from members of his cabinet, that more needs to be done. So potentially Number 10 felt they had to signal that they were going to act as well. Amelia, thank you very much.
Now, it was tea with the President for the King and Queen yesterday as they arrived in the US for their historic state visit yesterday afternoon US time, last night our time. After landing at Joint Base Andrews, the first stop was the White House before later attending a lavish garden party at the British ambassador's residence.
All eyes on this trip because the hope is that the blossoming friendship between the King and the President could perhaps help reconcile the slightly more fractious relationship between the President and the Prime Minister. Laura Bundock has the details.
A low-key start to a high-stakes visit, with a gentle touchdown before what could be a bumpy few days. The King arriving in the US for a state visit like no other. It'll be a stress test of his so-called soft power, with every step carefully planned. At the White House, a beaming president was clearly happy to host the royal couple. But behind these smiles lies a serious diplomatic mission. The government hopes combining the King and a president who loves the British monarchy will pay diplomatic dividends and help heal frictions in the historic friendship. Because on the surface, it's all about honouring 250 years of American independence. But today's landscape is shaped by sharper political differences and a president with unconventional diplomacy. Not that you'd know it here. For the King and Queen, a garden tea party at the British Embassy, with guests from both sides of the Atlantic. She's not meeting Epstein's victims, but the Queen heard from abuse campaigners.
I think, of course, it has to be a choice for the individuals, certainly for the King and Queen as they come here for this event. I think certainly we all prioritize the voices of the victims and the survivors.
The first day done, the small talk over, but much bigger moments of substance to come when the King addresses Congress. It'll be his voice, but the government's message. The King will say, our countries don't always agree, but always find a way to come together. And through reconciliation and renewal, he'll say we have one of the greatest alliances in human history. Words to diplomatically flatter and prove the UK-US relationship transcends the tension and personalities of this presidency. Laura Bundock, Sky News in Washington.
I'm joined now by our royal commentator, Alistair Bruce, to talk about all of this. Alistair, good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Good morning. I thought, by the way, the first thing is, I see the arrival pictures yesterday. You're reminded of what ability the King might have to warm President Trump and change his views, because the President adores him. I mean, he is grinning like a Cheshire cat in a way that he doesn't with all people that come to visit him.
I think the President must have remembered all the newspaper cuttings of his mother and thought, you know, here I am with my wife and the King and Queen on the doorstep of my house. How proud my mother would be. So I think that's part of it.
I think it's part of it, and either way, who cares if it works? We shall see if it does work or not. The big agenda item today, which is a great privilege to address both houses of Congress gathered together, and we're told, we're being lent to the fact this is a 20 to 25-minute speech. There's going to be a lot of content in it.
Yes, and the King will have been working on it very hard, along with his team and also, of course, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary. But it will be a chance for the King to reach through the issues that face the two countries and talk about the history of both and set the context for why the special relationship, as we call it, has endured for so long, even though it started in this terrifying disagreement that started with the Declaration of Independence.
But ironically, given that obviously the premise for the trip was the 250th anniversary and therefore tease up the ability to talk about the importance of democracy in the face of tyranny, etc., it's quite a sort of potentially controversial topic short term, in light of the criticism that President Trump often gets, or has been getting recently domestically, that he at times ignores the rules, the regulations that the Constitution has enshrined?
Well, I think the President appears to have divided in his own mind the King and the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And I think he is trying to delineate the fact that he's giving his very best welcome to the King and Queen, but he retains his ire for Keir Starmer. And I think that that is how he will continue and how he will take advantage of this opportunity to create the historic links and maintain them. Because in the end, you know, we're not going away, and nor is the United States, and the relationship that is shared through the language and through all those 250 years is immense.
So, Alistair, talk to me about, you said the speech that the Prime Minister, Foreign Secretary would have had an input on it. Would they have vetted every single word?
Yes, but I think that the King and his style, we saw when he spoke in the Parliament in France, he has his own way of putting the various points that he'll want to make. And he is very self-effacing, he'll use humour, and he knows his history. He has been fascinated by King George III anyway, and he made a study of it when he was quite young. So the whole story of the relationship between Britain and America will be woven in, and I think he'll do it with such a charm that I think it will land. But it's a tough audience.
What about behind closed doors, when they have what will be numerous, no doubt, 5 minutes here, maybe 50 minutes here, when it's just the two of them, King and President talking? Does he only put across points that the Prime Minister has approved, or can he freewheel a little bit then?
I think the King knows the constitutional constraint around him, but at the same time, he's a human being, and he has had fairly strong conversations as Prince of Wales on the environment with a president who arguably hasn't placed the environment and its interests at the top of his agenda in the past. So I think that the King knows how to hold a gentle but robust conversation with all sorts of powerful people. Do you think he enjoys trips like this? I don't know. I think that in the end, I think he'll enjoy it if it works. I think it's, you know, they are of an age, the King and Queen, and they will be probably waking up in the middle of the Washington night now and probably thinking, crikey, are we going to get back to sleep before we have to face this very long day? I mean, it goes right through to the state banquet. And that is a long day for both the King and the Queen.
Well, if they do wake up in the middle of the night, they should flick us on, because Sky News is available to view globally for free.
I'm sure they have it available in Blair House. Yeah.
To people already watching us, but it is the case. Alistair, as always, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
We are going to turn to AI now, because spy networks seem to be using AI chatbots on social media to recruit potential criminals here in the UK. A Sky News team has been investigating an apparent Iranian recruitment channel which uses the messaging app Telegram.
During the chat, paid jobs were offered, and they varied from providing intelligence to carrying out acts of violence overseas. Here's our home editor, Jason Farrell.
This channel on the chat platform Telegram looks like a normal social media feed, but it's actually a funnel, drawing people in to acts of violence and espionage.
In recent weeks, we've seen crude attacks on Jewish targets in the UK and suggestions from authorities that some perpetrators might have been recruited by Iran on Telegram. So we're going to go down this recruitment funnel, examining what we find with the help of a former intelligence officer and former security advisor to the British government.
So they're using this as a filter, right? So people who want to consume a certain kind of message about the war in Iran will subscribe to this, and they'll self-select. So this is the first cut.
Then comes the interactive element, a link offering you the chance to cooperate with Iran's intelligence services. There's a series of pages that offer reassurances about the cause, Palestinians being a key one, and that the Iranian intelligence services will look after you.
We're seeing monitoring and support, suggesting that if you get in trouble, then the long arm of the Iranian intelligence service will be able to reach out and give you support, which I think is very interesting.
My producer Nick has already entered an ID a few weeks ago, and the conversation that follows takes place over a number of days. It shows us what they want and how they try to hook Nick in.
Tell me your name, city you're from,
what access you have, what skills you possess.
The next question, do you know anyone in the military or security services? So that's going to tick a box on somebody's form.
And it is not unreasonable to ask whether at this point you're even talking to a human or whether this is the equivalent of a customer service bot.
They immediately want to know if Nick has access. Nick asks what they mean. It's spelled out. Do you know anyone in the military or security services in your country who you can get information from? These days there's a lot of movement of Americans to British bases. It's a frank request for Nick to involve himself in espionage.
Well, Jason joins us now, and there's more of Jason's reporting to watch on the Sky News website if you haven't done so already. But this is really quite striking in both how sort of scary it is, but also how obvious it all is and how the sort of approaches that these people make.
Yeah, and they're casting the net wide. It's obviously available on this social media channel. They have a channel which they set up and they pull down every now and then they rename it. But it's essentially pushing you through to the same area, which is what is probably an AI chatbot, which then asks a series of questions. You saw the first one there. Did Nick have any contact with the security services, with the military? They're trying to work out his usefulness. The next question to him was, would you be willing to travel to Israel? And when he answers yes to that, he then seems to be interacting with an individual who becomes more interested in him, a bit more persuasive. Nick's asking all sorts of questions and he's being given lots of holding answers, lots of reassurance. But is ultimately then asked if he would hold up his passport and read out on a video, hello, I'm from London and I want to cooperate. And at that point, the handler, if we want to call them that, is trying to get Nick hooked in, because after he's done that, he is compromised. And, you know, they could use that against him, they could blackmail him, they could certainly coerce him to do something because he's put himself out there. So that's the funnel that we were going down. A lot of it's AI, but we think also individuals.
So, you know, it does feel like AI is going to transform all kinds of things. I was having a conversation, I spoke to you about this earlier, Jason, off air, with somebody who was, you know, previously very high up in some of the security services. And they were saying that we're kind of sleepwalking into a huge problem here for state actors, but also individuals or smaller groups using AI in order to breach security. Governments, firms, individuals.
Everyone has to be alive to the capability of AI and what it can do. And what this shows as an example is that a terrorist organisation or a security service can essentially curate the internet. They can curate social media. People are self-selecting, of course, by going onto certain websites to look at certain things. And in this instance, something that is sympathetic to Iran, lots of feeds about that. It's also interesting that some of the language is in Hebrew. They're trying to reach out to Jewish people. They're perhaps also trying to send out a message to Israel saying, we can infiltrate you. But then there's a button you press, and then it is curating people. And what they are doing is building a database, whoever this is. And it might not be Iran. It could be Moscow. It could be our own security services. But someone, and possibly more than one person, is building a database saying this person's willing to act sabotage. This person's willing to, travel to Israel. This person's willing to do something more extreme. And the more successful it is at doing that, and the better the AI becomes, the wider it can cast its net, the more people it can bring in, and therefore the greater the threat to our national security.
Jason, great stuff. Thanks so much. And a reminder, you can watch the full report on the website. Right, we want to talk a little bit now about BP earnings, which just crossed. And I'm afraid the headline of this is what's bad news for the British economy and the British consumer is good news for British petroleum. Let's just start with the oil price, just to give you a reminder of where things stand. Up sharply since the start of the war. By the way, up sharply over the course of the last 10 days as well. It's up another 2% today. Brent is at 111. We're kind of somewhat stealthily over the course of the last week back to some of the worst levels so far of this war. Now, BP's earnings that came out this morning are for Q1, January, February, March. And just to state the obvious, that is only 1 month of the 3 of really high oil prices. Now, they rose a bit from the start of the year anyway in January and February, but BP have said this morning that for those Q1 results, the average oil price for their operations was $81 a barrel. So some way below, of course, the 111 that we're at now. And I just want you to keep that in mind as we now look at BP's Q1 profit. It's jumped. It's jumped significantly to 3.2 billion. The expectation coming into this, even on raised expectations, everyone knows the oil price has gone up, was for 2.7, and the quarter before was 1.4. So it's more than doubled quarter over quarter. Oil prices up, obviously good for business. By the way, particularly good for them because their global operations aren't that exposed to the Middle East. So they haven't seen production cuts on operation there. They've seen prices rise on all of their operations everywhere, including, by the way, quite a lot in the US. Now, look, we're seeing a big jump quarter on quarter, more than doubling in terms of their profits, even when oil prices were only really high in one of those 3 months in the quarter. Remember I said average 81 for the quarter on BP's numbers. We're now at 111. If we persist at 111 for the whole of Q2, you're going to see that more than double again. And that's, of course, what sort of happened during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. We saw persistently high oil prices and energy prices, not just for a single month of a quarter, but for multiple quarters, and that really boosted profitability. Let's have a look at what this means for the BP share price. Higher, as you would expect, no surprise there. Started the year at about 420, the share price this morning, which is opened higher this morning. That's the move we've seen today, up closer to 570, 580, so a significant increase in the share price. Now, I said at the top, what's been good for BP is bad for the UK, and we've seen a big spike again in borrowing costs. Here's the UK 10-year yield. I picked the 10-year today because back above 5% this morning. Really quite worrying. I said with the oil price as a whole, we're back in and around some of the worst levels of the war. UK 10-year borrowing costs back to the worst level of the war. There's a bit of political risk premium built into that today. In fact, the move today just took us just above 5%. The move yesterday was quite significant, and a lot of the political woes the Prime Minister is facing plays into that. But really, look at that unbelievable increase in the UK borrowing costs from the start of the war. And, well, you can't hide from it. What's bad for the UK economy as a whole boosts profits for companies like BP.
Yeah, and that, I guess, in itself is going to be pretty controversial, not least for people facing higher energy bills and seeing the profits made by energy companies.
It's going to be very controversial. I think the one caveat you have to say to it is that of their profits, only about 10 to 15% come from UK operations, from the North Sea. So the only difference you'd say, this isn't like they're tapping British resources under the ground in the UK and suddenly making a lot more profit on that. Their operations all around the world, I mean, most notably actually in the US now, in the Gulf of Mexico, or the Gulf of America, as it's now called. 40% or so of their profits come from there. They've got a lot in Eastern Europe, Azerbaijan. They used to have some in Russia. They had to sell that off a bit in the Middle East. So this is a global company that happens to be headquartered and listed here. And the balance you have to play with this is, should we tax them more on this sort of stuff? Or at some point, do we cross the line and risk them saying, do you know what? I'm upping sticks. Why are we headquartered in London anyway? Let's go and headquarter ourselves in the US. And that portion in the UK, what does come from the North Sea, the 10 to 15% of their profits, is already taxed with the energy profit level, which takes their overall tax rate for those operations to 78%. So it's a balance. But, as you say, for obvious reasons, it's politically uncomfortable when a company makes so much more profit when everyone else is hurting.
And by the way, early this morning when we were just getting our coffee and easing ourselves into the day.
Riffing about oil prices as I do. I just bore Sophie with that every day.
Wilf told me the origin of BP, which I think you should share with people.
Yeah, so people don't know this.
I had no idea.
It was founded in 1909, and British Petroleum was actually originally the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, which was because it was founded in Iran, all the original assets.
So the oil was from Iran?
It was back in Iran, classic, obviously, old school British approach of nicking other people's assets, but it was originally an Iranian, really, British asset.
Absolutely fascinating. Coming up, we are going to be talking more, of course, about the economy, but we're also going to be talking about AI as well. More to come. That's
We're trying to see as much as we can.
We're in an area that's just been reclaimed.
Mr. Zuma, Sky News.
People are directly protesting.
The whole neighbourhood has rallied around her.
It's been impenetrable to journalists over the last 2 years of war in Sudan.
I've been waiting for this for 2 years. It doesn't feel like a big homecoming.
It was never going to be pretty. War isn't pretty.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News presenter? Perfect. Let's bring you some breaking news. Being a Sky News presenter. I began by asking...
Thank you so much.
...trusting us to tell her story. The battle for number 10. Sky News has been given exclusive access. Let me give you a sneak peek. It was the day those present would never forget. Why did you decide to open up and tell your story?
Welcome back. Well, Sky News investigations exposed the widening gulf between AI projects announced for the UK and what's actually being built. We've obtained exclusive new figures showing our AI infrastructure will lag behind its target for years to come. Our technology correspondent Roland Manthorpe has this report for us.
The UK wants to be a serious player in AI, a sovereign player. But lately, those ambitions hit a bit of a setback when OpenAI cancelled its Stargate UK project, a massive data centre project in the UK. And you've got to admit, this does seem a little embarrassing, to be honest, because we literally laid out the red carpet for these guys. This is Sam Altman, the head of OpenAI, at the state dinner for President Trump last September. That was when the deal was struck. Now it's not happening. It seems kind of embarrassing, right? Except that when I dug into this, I wasn't so sure. OpenAI blamed regulatory uncertainty and high energy costs for its decision. And yeah, no doubt about it, UK energy is expensive. But look over here. That's when OpenAI made the announcement of Stargate. And that's where we are now. What happened between there and there to change their mind? And what happened between there and here? They didn't get the message about UK energy. And when I dug into it further, I also found that as soon as OpenAI cancelled Stargate, Alphabet, the owner of Google, swooped in to buy up those chips. Maybe there is demand to build in the UK after all. And I think that overall, you can see that's true. That's what this chart shows. This is a chart of the value of the data centre construction projects that have received full planning approval. This is a chart in millions. So this figure over here represents £10 billion of demand to build in the UK. You look at this and you think that the cancellation of Stargate was probably more about OpenAI than it was about the UK. Except in one way. I'm not sure that the Stargate project was actually, in itself, a blow, but it does tell you something about a problem that we have here, which is that we're very good at announcing things, but we're not so good at getting them built. So what this chart shows, this is a chart of the value of the data centre projects that have actually started construction. I mean, you can see, first off, it's not growing at all. Not even close to accelerating. And secondly, the gap between reality and ambition is enormous. And you can see that here if you zoom in. This is London, the UK's key data centre market, because it's really useful to put your data centres as near as possible to your customers if you can. And this is where we are now. And this is where these analysts, CBRE, who shared these figures with me, suggest we'll be by 2030. Again, no acceleration, and a huge gap between reality and ambition. The reasons for this are complex, but essentially, it does show that the government does have a bit of an issue here. Yeah, maybe Stargate wasn't the blow that it's been made out to be, but in order to stop it becoming a symbol of failure, they've got to make sure that ambition is actually matched by building on the ground.
Roland Manthorpe there for us. Let's continue the discussion. Delighted to say we're joined by the former head of the UK government's Office for AI, Sana Karangani. Sana's also now Chief Strategy Officer for ERA 4. Great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining us. What's your headline takeaway for why we are so slow to develop this type of infrastructure?
Well, can I just start off by saying it was a really great report by Roland, where he didn't just stop at saying we must have done something wrong, OpenAI is leaving, right? This continues to be a nation that's punching above its weight when it comes to AI. We have all the frontier labs here, headquartered here already or moving here, and we have some of the best universities across the world with AI, and we also have a government, yes, with extremely high ambitions, but they want to double down on this. And so, first off, I think just a great report and useful to sometimes stop for a second and pat ourselves on the back and then ask, what can we do even better?
Well, that wasn't the gist I took away from Roland's report. I guess there is a lot to be positive about. And as you said, some of the research and the early stage stuff is particularly exciting. But I don't think the scale of delivering on the compute power that's needed for this is something that is worth patting ourselves on the back on. And I don't think that did come from Roland's report, unless I missed something.
No, you're right. You're right. I mean, I think he was very clear about the gap between the target that's being set, the ambition that is being set by the government to hit 6 gigawatts of compute provision by 2030 and where we are actually, right? And Roland goes on in his report about all of the things that stand in the way. So access to power, access to land. These are difficult problems. And the UK continues to hit upon legacy issues in these things. I think that it's incumbent upon both the government as well as the private sector to work together to remove some of these hurdles. So I'll give you some examples. Some of the biggest blockers to compute are access to land and access to energy. And the government is currently doing a reform in order to kind of remove some of the chancers, say, in the queue, or some of the bitty projects that are in there. And what's necessary for this reform is optimization and taking a strategic perspective by government on which projects to back, right? And this is difficult. It's brand new. They haven't done it before, but they're trying. And I think the key is that we have to work alongside them, such as companies like mine, for example. At ERA 4, we need to work alongside them to help show different ways that we can do this. At ERA 4, we have our own land, so we own land across the UK. We also provide our own energy. So we have 50 megawatts of renewable energy that we are creating from translating the methane that's captured from landfill sites into electricity, and then using that electricity to power data centers. This allows us to jump past some of the queue and create some space while we wait for the reform to happen. So other innovative projects like this need to start to happen in order to allow us to build what is essentially the railroads for the future.
Is there a potential benefit from us being slow off the mark with building some of this data center and compute power capacity as we look at either efficiencies being made in the way that they're built, and we'll be building the newer versions if we're a bit late, but more importantly, whether or not the whole industry's got a bit over its skis? It's quite possible that too much capacity has been built, or there are plans to build in the US.
I think this is a wonderful question, and you're absolutely right to ask it. So I think there's always benefits to being a fast follower. And I think in the case where we're talking about building capacity to match demand, it's widely believed right now that we are just at the cusp or at the foothills of adoption of AI technologies, but are by our most traditional sectors. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of pilots and case studies across the board, but in terms of actual real adoption, we are still moving up that curve. Now, having said that, in Roland's report, we heard that the capacity gets bought out. The GPUs get bought out immediately by other tech companies right away. So the demand is there, but the demand is coming from the large tech companies at the moment. In the future, we will see that demand across all our sectors because, as you know, these technologies are pervasive. They're touching everything we do, say, work on. And so as we move up that adoption curve, we will need capacity across every country and a lot more than we have today. So, you know, if we're a little slow off the mark, I mean, you know, who knows? The key, though, is that we need to continue to invest. We need to continue to push for the reforms that we need to enable the sovereign provision of data center capability here in the UK. And we need to continue to back the companies here that are allowing or that are building this infrastructure to allow for us to move up that adoption curve.
Sana, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you.
Let's have a look at the weather now.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Got more sunny spells on the way this week, but it's going to feel quite chilly at times with a brisk wind coming in off the North Sea. It's a cloudy and breezy start this morning with patchy drizzle, mainly affecting southern Britain. Skies are clearer further west across much of Ireland and western Scotland, but you may run into a few fog patches early on. That grey and damp start will gradually improve as the morning goes on, with cloud and fog lifting to reveal sunny spells.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
It's going to be a huge day in Westminster with the Foreign Affairs Select Committee starting live at 9 a.m. Huge pressure on the Prime Minister will be building up to it. Next with Beth.
With respect, Minister, answer the question. It's you.
Hello and welcome, I'm Cathy Newman.
So could the outcome of these elections be manipulated? New me, new show, new furniture. Hard news needs a hard chair. I feel like I'm in therapy. Oh, there's room for two on this one. Do you think people will take me seriously with my feet up?
Sorry, madam, but we're closing now.
Oh, sorry. Sofa sorted. Let's get this show on the road.
It's like a football final with only one team on the pitch. This isn't just a call to vote, but a call to remember. The freedom fought for by the African National Congress.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
A cyclone and 2 burst dams wiped out hundreds of generational homes.
This was the second dam that the floodwaters hit before it tore into Derna. We are in the heart of Nairobi, and we're watching as protesters were heavily tear gassed.
The sheer fearlessness and persistence of these guys is astonishing.
We help you understand the world with us. I remember going into the iconic Omdurman market in the heart of Sudan's capital for the first time since the war started. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor. I witnessed the complete destruction of a place linked to my childhood memories and the lives of millions of people. This is insane. This was a bustling residential area. So many friends who lived here. My most memorable interview was with a 15-year-old boy who'd survived being stranded on a migrant boat on its way from Senegal to the Canary Islands.
After 13 days, our food, water and fuel supply ran out.
I felt awe when we saw the mountain gorillas in Rwanda.
They call him the king of the jungle. This is the alpha silverback.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky News.
I urge you not to look away. If Hamas hands the hostages over, they will end this conflict. The world has been watching. Good to see you again. How are you? Did she say how he was?
The conditions are awful.
The jets were ordered to come back.
Historic day here today. How will you respond if India does launch airstrikes?
They'll be allowed to warn.
I'm just going to put some body armour on.
I'm Yalda Hakim.
So we are now building up to a potentially huge day for the Prime Minister here in Westminster. In less than 15 minutes' time, we're going to get Sir Philip Barton, the former lead civil servant at the Foreign Office, giving evidence as to whether he was pressured by Number 10 over Lord Mandelson. We've been getting some arrivals to Number 10 this morning. Wes Streeting, House Secretary, first to walk in the door with that nice red umbrella. Darren Jones there, one of the kind of key Prime Minister's loyalists. Someone we potentially expect to be hearing from in the Commons later today as well. Pat McFadden also walking down. They're the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, arriving at Cabinet this morning. Dodging all the shouts, but you've got to try, right? And then we also finally had Lisa Nandy, the Culture Secretary,
Do you support the Prime Minister?
walking into Cabinet there. But it's a huge day. We've got the evidence to the Foreign Affairs Committee and then, of course, the vote in the House of Commons as to whether there should be a referral to the Privilege Committee. We're joined now by the Conservatives. The Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Alex Burkhardt, is here. Great to have you with us today. It's going to be a potentially huge day in Parliament. What do you... So, first of all, let's talk about the vote later on. Do you expect the Prime Minister to win that vote?
Look, and obviously the Labour whips are in panic this morning. They've been phoning people all night, trying to persuade them to back the Prime Minister. But look, what's going on here is really straightforward. If they think the Prime Minister's innocent, they wouldn't fear an investigation. It's the fact they know that he's done something wrong. They know what the committee is likely to find. That's why they're having to really turn the screws on their MPs. Well, I mean, what Labour would say, I guess, is that actually they shouldn't dignify this with parliamentary time, because this is just a stunt in the words. Yeah, you're right. That's what the Cabinet would say. But everyone heard what the Prime Minister said in Prime Minister's Questions last week. Everyone can read it in Hansard. He absolutely misrepresented what Ollie Robbins said. You know, he said that Ollie Robbins had claimed I was never absolutely not put under any pressure, when actually many times Ollie Robbins said I and my department were put under constant pressure. And you know, sometimes people get things wrong in the House of Commons, and as a minister you have a duty to come back as soon as possible and correct the record. We've given the Prime Minister that opportunity. He hasn't done it, and that means that we have to take it on to the next stage. And the Conservatives are doing that with the other opposition parties, not just us. And so the vote today is on whether the Prime Minister should be referred to this cross-party group of MPs who would take a judgment. So there's two things to kind of, I guess, put the case for the defence to, from what you've just said. The first is the pressure line. And this is the key thing, isn't it? And this is going to be the key thing when we, hear from Sir Philip Barton later as well. The government's line is that there is a difference between incorrect pressure, as in you have to do this, you have to have this finding, and the normal pressure that comes from the job in Downing Street, right? And that's fair enough. But if anybody reads Ollie Robbins' evidence, it's very clear the sort of pressure that he was under, right? And the government is again trying to re-engineer the words of the former senior servant in the Foreign Office. There's actually there's another issue as well, which is about whether full due process was followed. Again, it's very clear that it wasn't, because in November 2024, the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, told the Prime Minister, if you want to appoint Peter Mandelson, get the security clearance done first and make sure that he declares his interests. And it looks very much like neither of those things were done. If Keir Starmer wins the vote, will you respect the verdict and, not try again? Well, look, if obviously this will be done for today, but what will come out of today is that people will see Labour MPs... So you might bring another vote in the future, is what you're saying? I totally reserve the right to do that. But what people will see is Labour MPs voting to stop an investigation into something that they know has happened. And the Prime Minister has dragged everybody, a whole bunch of people down with him so far over the appointment that he made. He's fired his Chief of Staff, he's fired the Cabinet Secretary, he's fired the senior civil servant in the Foreign Office, and today he's going to start dragging Labour MPs down with him as well. OK, Alex Burkhardt, thank you very much indeed. Alex Burkhardt speaking there for the Conservatives. Well, we are building up to a huge day here
in Westminster. We're going to be taking you live to the committee room where the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is going to start shortly. So Philip Barton first up there, and then Morgan McSweeney, of course, the former Chief of Staff to the Prime Minister. Beth's here. You know it's a big day when we've got Beth on mornings.
Just snuck in.
Feeling all right post-marathon?
Yeah, thanks for my marathon. I was watching yesterday when you, after the man that did it in under 2 hours,
that was
you
brilliant.
Gave me my little shout-out, so I was very grateful for that.
Which was very genuine.
Yeah,
anybody that competed, albeit the 2 hours really was impressive.
But can I just say, before we get on to the matter today, running a marathon in under 2 hours blows my... I cannot even...
No, hold on. Running a marathon at all blows our minds.
Yeah,
so
but
congrats
exactly. He must have sprinted for 2 hours. The man is a...
And by the way, you snuck on very deftly and showed no signs of marathon fatigue there. What are you most focused on today? Of the trio of hurdles, McSweeney, Privileges, Barton.
Well, look, this is such a massive day in Westminster. I mean, from a interest point of view personally, to actually see Morgan McSweeney, the Chief of Staff, give evidence at a select committee, it's fascinating because you never hear about this guy, so you... And if you
always hear about him, but never hear from him.
Yeah, you never hear from him, and I imagine a lot of people watching will have heard the name Morgan McSweeney dozens of times, and so for the first time we see his evidence, so I'm just very interested to see that performance, not least because we compare it to that other Chief of Staff, Dominic Cummings, that gave evidence to a select committee around COVID handling in government and was absolutely excoriating about his old boss. I do not imagine Morgan McSweeney will be like that of Keir Starmer. I imagine that Morgan McSweeney will try to take quite a lot of responsibility about the Mandelson decision. But look, in the substance of it, Philip Barton, again, is going to be fascinating. He was the permanent secretary in the Foreign Office at the time that Mandelson was announced. He left his post 8 months early, 5 years term. He left 8 months early. There's lots of questions about why did he leave early. There is, in the documentation that's already been released, indications that he was concerned about the Mandelson appointment. What did he say to other people in government? What did he say to the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, who has said, according to the humble address, that the appointment was weirdly rushed? So you've got all of that body of evidence and that pressure on the Prime Minister before this vote, Sophie, that you were just talking to Alex about this afternoon.
Yeah, on the vote, it's interesting because I've been kind of watching to see what MPs are saying. You've got, like, Dawn Butler, you've got Carl Turner, effectively saying it's a stunt that they're going to back the Prime Minister, not necessarily people who you'd think would be loyal. But I guess my question, Beth, is, even if it goes through, which we probably expect it to, what should we read into that? Does that mean that they support the Prime Minister in office, or is it actually not that straightforward?
So while I was sort of on my rest bed yesterday after the marathon, I was also on my phone a lot because politics never stops, even if I needed to for one day only. And I was making a lot of calls, and I think what was happening was in the afternoon, it was unclear about how this was going to go. Were they going to give it a free vote? When the Prime Minister signalled that he was going to whip MPs already knew this because they were having the slips withdrawn. And what that means is, if you want to go and campaign, for example, or you've got an event in your constituency, you'll be given a slip, which means you don't have to come to Parliament. All of those were being withdrawn. So the MPs knew what was on the cards. And look, I think a few things happened. There was a sort of move about what would the big beast do, what would the Angela Rayner's do, what was Lucy Powell going to do, the deputy leader? Because you remember Angela Rayner was the one that really pressed on the humble address, and she was the trigger really to push for that release of those documents to the Intelligence and Security Committee. And what began to happen like late afternoon, early evening was you were getting soundings that these big figures in the party were going to line up behind the Prime Minister. You also had Emily Thornberry, the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, saying, look, I'm already doing this work on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. If we get to that end of the process and there's questions to answer from the Prime Minister, then we can call him and then refer him. And I think what was happening was, I think the line started of, well, he hasn't misled the House in any way, so just this doesn't mean anything. And it moved to, actually, the process is already continuing. But in a nutshell, MPs are furious. And what I'm picking up is, yes, they will vote in support of the government and vote this down, but they're furious that they've been put in this position. They're furious that they're going to be accused by the Conservatives of a cover-up, and it's just an absolutely sulphurous mood.
That said, I mean, slightly to Sophie's point in her question of Alex Burkhardt, after so many scored points from the Conservatives and Kemi Badenoch in the last few weeks, might they regret going as far as pushing a vote that then, at least temporarily, might galvanise a bit of support behind the Prime Minister?
Well, I think what's happened in the past 24 hours is that because the Conservatives have really gone in and politicised it ahead of the local elections, it's given... I'm going to use an Arsenal analogy. You're going to enjoy this in a moment. But it's given Starmer's team some metal with which to sort of fight against them. You know, like how Pep Guardiola was not giving Arsenal any ammo to kind of rile the troops before that match. You remember that? Yeah. It's the same sort of thing. So, but it's gone the wrong way for the Conservatives because they've politicised it so much before the elections. It's actually helped. It's helped the Prime Minister. But from their perspective, they're keeping this on the front pages. They're keeping questions about Starmer's judgment on the front pages. They're keeping a sense of a sleaze scandal in Westminster on the front pages, all ahead of the local elections.
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing, isn't it? And it's going to be a wounded Keir Starmer, whatever happens. The number 10 line, we're building up to the committee, so let's stay with it just before we get the Sir Philip Barton evidence. The line from number 10 seems to be, yeah, there was pressure, but it was normal pressure. It was pressure just to get something done, you know, in a timely fashion, which is what everyone in top jobs gets. There was no undue pressure. And I guess that is going to be the key, what we're going to be hearing just in a few moments' time from Sir Philip Barton.
And this is where it gets a bit sticky, because in the Commons on Wednesday, the Prime Minister said there was no undue pressure. That gave the Conservatives an ability to say that's not what Robbins was saying, and the Prime Minister then clarified that and said there was no undue pressure in the rounds of the vetting process. And now we're going to hear another version of events, and I think it's going to be, again, very, very uncomfortable. Uncomfortable for the Prime Minister, uncomfortable for MPs. But I wonder, Sophie, and I'm guessing, I don't know, I wonder if the Barton evidence is really tough and then it's helped out by Morgan. But the only thing is with the Morgan McSweeney evidence is that MPs sort of say the Prime Minister's an empty vessel, he defers everything to advisers. And if Morgan McSweeney comes in and says, it was all me, that just reinforces it. And in the end, it's about leadership and having a grip. And it's a Prime Minister that doesn't appear to have a grip. I mean, it's even up in the air at the moment about whether there'll be a reshuffle after the local elections, and that was nailed on about 2 weeks ago.
Interestingly, though, from Cathy Newman's outstanding interview with the Prime Minister last night, he was pretty positive about Morgan McSweeney. So I think the chances that Morgan McSweeney
Well, I think that was the clue, wasn't it?
Oh, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, he's like, we're still... He went to his leaving do. He made the point that he didn't sack him, he resigned. But, you know, as I understand it, that final call was not the Prime Minister sacking Morgan McSweeney, it was giving him options.
With Barton, though, if Barton went as far as to say, I left my post because I said we can't approve this person, that would be fatal. If he went that far, wouldn't he?
I don't know what he's going to say.
But hypothetically, if he goes as far as to say the reason I left my job 8 months early...
But you see, what's happened in all of this, Wolf, is that one person says one thing and another person says something else. Of course, if he says that, it's really, really, really damaging for the Prime Minister. But it's kind of that idea that due process wasn't followed is sort of baked into some of it. And what's happening is that the Prime Minister is finding enough information. Like, they put out a letter from Chris Warmald, the former Cabinet Secretary, who was the top civil servant in government, again saying that due process was followed last night. So what we're getting is this sort of war of words and different accounts. But yes, of course, Philip Barton's evidence today could be very, very damaging to the Prime Minister, depending on what he says. And as I said, he has been like a Trappist monk. It has not been from trying.
It is
trying. He has sort of not wanted to comment up to now. So that's why it's so fascinating to see what he will say.
It is 9 o'clock, so as soon as we get anything from that committee room, it's still just got a nice sort of holding picture of Big Ben, we will bring it to you just as soon as we can. And Beth, I just want to pick up on something that you said, because for me, this kind of gets to the heart of it. You were saying that the Morgan McSweeney evidence could be damaging because if he says it's all on me and not on the Prime Minister, then actually that feeds into people's worst fears that he's a delegator, that he doesn't not a leader.
I have to say, the past few days, you're in this moment, and you will know this from political reporting, where you can't put your phone down, you cannot stop making calls because of the uncertainty. And as someone in government said to me yesterday, everyone is trying to work out if the Prime Minister is fatally wounded. So they know he's wounded. Is he fatally wounded? And at that point, does the pack move? And a Cabinet Minister said to me, part of the issue is if there is a settled view that he will not fight the next election, which apparently is something that some at the very top of his circle are beginning to float. You know, there are 10 different answers to what should come next, depending on 10 people you ask, i.e. there's no settled view, there isn't an obvious succession plan, there's runners and riders, people like Andy Burnham, he's not even in Parliament. And so it's really, really uncertain. It's very febrile. But I think the problem for Starmer is if he comes through this, and yes, he's in post, he has no authority with his MPs, he doesn't even have the political authority potentially to do a reshuffle, and he can't get anything through government. He can stagger on, but he can't actually affect any change. That's what MPs are weighing up at the moment. And that's why the mood in the party is so dismal. And somehow he has got to, in the next couple of weeks, try to get through this and try and persuade his MPs to stick with him. And I think it's going to be a very, very febrile couple of weeks. And if you know, Sophie, when we're sitting here on Friday, I don't know...
Interrupts. Sorry, Beth. We'll have lots more from you throughout the day, but let's hear from Emily Thornbury.
This morning is Sir Philip Barton. Thank you very much for coming.
Welcome.
You've been in front of the committee a few times now, and when you were permanent Under-Secretary at the Foreign Office, it's nice to see you. I imagine that you thought one of the benefits of retirement was that you weren't going to see us again.
I'd like to be able to say, Chair, it's nice to be back. I'm not sure that's entirely honest, but anyway, I might be accused of misleading you.
But I think the thing to do is to remind you that you're no longer a civil servant. So I suppose the first question is you did have eight months left on your contract before you left. So why did you leave?
I'll be honest and open with you, and I'm no longer a civil servant. It wasn't my choice to leave at that point, Chair, and I would have preferred to see out my tenure. But after what I think was a very successful transition to the Labour team in the FCDO, David Lammy wanted to make a change and told me that, and told me he wanted somebody who would lead the department over the years ahead and carry out a major transformation programme. So I agreed to leave, and just to finish my thought...
Major transformation programme
of the department
means what?
Well,
means 25% cuts in the staff?
That at the time wasn't obviously known because there hadn't been the spending review, Chair, but it's not that unusual, just to finish my thoughts on this, for a permanent secretary to change, you know, following a change of party of government. So I agreed to step down in January of last year.
OK. I mean, I know that you were really only properly involved in the process for the appointment of Peter Mandelson for a very short time. So I think probably basically December to mid-January. But can I just take you back to a few months prior to that? Before Donald Trump was elected president, we've got Karen Pierce, who's the ambassador of the United States, a very experienced ambassador, popular with the Biden team and with the Trump team as well. We've got an internal candidate who's been there's been a process for getting a replacement for Karen Pierce when she steps down, I believe.
So, as I think is clear from Lord Case's advice to the Prime Minister,
yes,
revealed in the papers given to the humble address, the last government decided in the first part of 2024 to hold an internal competition for to find a replacement for Dame Karen, and that individual was recommended at the end of that process, but in the end it wasn't taken forward because the general election was called and the appointment process was frozen under the rules that apply on significant decisions during an election period. So it was...
Oh, I see. I didn't realise it was pre-election. Right.
It was before the election.
Okay, cool. So let's go to late summer, early September. What discussions were taking place about an alternative candidate then?
I wasn't involved in any discussions at that point.
Right. And then 2 months later, we have Peter Mandelson announced as ambassador to the United States. Were you, I mean, at what stage were you involved in any discussions?
Yeah, no, good question, Jay. I was first involved when I was, in mid-December, told of the Prime Minister's decision to make a political appointment as ambassador.
Yeah.
And that political appointment was Peter Mandelson. So that was when I was first involved. It was, if I recall right, the 15th of December, so the beginning of the week that ended with his announcement.
Okay. And then from the first tranche of the humble address papers, we've seen that between November the 11th and December the 11th, the Prime Minister's PPS and Private Secretary for the Foreign Office give advice. We see the then Cabinet Secretary, Sir Simon Case, give his advice, and we see the due diligence carried out by the Cabinet Office. But we don't see advice from you. I mean, it may be for members of the public. That seems surprising that you're not... That, you know, were you ever asked your opinion about appointing Peter Mandelson as ambassador? I mean, you were in charge of the Foreign Office.
The first I was aware of the decision was when I was told on the 15th of December. The first I was aware of the advice that had gone to the Prime Minister, or indeed that it was being formulated, was when I read it in the humble address release papers. I wasn't involved. I wasn't told a decision was coming.
Would you have expected to?
I think it is, well, I think two things on it. I think one is, on the face of it, it is reasonable for the head of the Foreign Office to be involved in thinking around what is our major top bilateral ambassador post. On the other hand, given clearly the Prime Minister was deciding to make a political appointment, I think it is also reasonable that civil servants would not be directly involved in discussions around what is a political appointment, because in the end that is a matter for elected politicians, and I can also see the sensitivity. So I'm a bit conflicted. I mean, clearly, I think ideally you want to have a situation where there is a tight and small circle of people who can be consulted on a big decision like this on a basis of trust. But I can also see that in the end it was a political matter, and I suspect, I have no knowledge of this, was discussed in political circles at the top of the government.
In a circle of trust, do you think you'd have a place?
Look, not in a political conversation, no. But in the end, this is an appointment to the most senior job in our foreign service. I was head of the diplomatic service, so I think it is possible, without asking me as a civil servant or any head of the diplomatic service, I think it is possible for them to be involved in a conversation, for example, around what are the requirements? What does the UK need in the period ahead, and that sort of thing, even if that isn't, you're not then involved in the absolute decision-making discussions around individuals who are politicians, because it's a political appointment.
John.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just follow up one or two of the questions from the Chair? You said that the process had been underway for an internal competition, but come the general election, it was frozen. Once the new government had been elected, was the process not then recommenced?
Well, I wasn't involved, as I said, so I don't know whether that was considered very much. Obviously, you have seen the then Cabinet Secretary's advice on that, and that's all I know about it, is that advice.
The Foreign Office must have been continuing to look at potential candidates to replace Karen Pierce.
The view Karen Pierce had basically been agreed formally, as the notes say, to stay until January 2025. I took the view that actually what made most sense was to know the outcome of both the UK general election, but also the US presidential elections. And obviously there was, until the election was called, there was an uncertainty around the timing of the UK general election, given our political system, with an end point of January 2025. Karen and I had discussed, therefore, whether or not, if required, she'd be willing to stay a bit longer while we were able to see how those two elections played out, as it were. So there was flexibility. So to answer your question, in terms of September of 2024, that was before we knew the outcome of the US elections. The new government was only just in. So the FCDO and I were not actively looking at that point for candidates, because I felt we had time to see the outcome of the US elections, and Karen had shown flexibility over exactly when she ended in the beginning part of 2025.
And when were you first told that it was likely to be a political appointment?
When I was told of the Prime Minister's decision.
15th of December?
Yes.
Until the 15th of December, you had no information that any discussion had taken place, or certainly that a decision had been reached?
No.
And when you were told that a decision had been reached and it was Peter Mandelson, did you express any concerns about that?
I was, as I say, I was told of a decision, so I wasn't asked for advice. I was told a due diligence process had been carried out, and I think this is known now, as the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks and had accepted those risks and decided to proceed. So I then moved on to a conversation, was asked for advice on the practical steps required to meet what was the Prime Minister's decision, and then the requirement around the timescale.
You say the Prime Minister had been made aware of the risks, but he hadn't, because the developed vetting hadn't been carried out. So all that had taken place was the due diligence. Did you ask whether or not developed vetting had been taken out or had taken place?
It was clear at that point that vetting had not taken place. It was clear to me at that point the step that had taken place was due diligence, not vetting.
Can I just ask you, do you remember who it was that was telling you these things?
I had a conversation with the private secretary in number 10.
And did you express a view as to whether or not developed vetting should take place before an announcement?
Yeah. So on that, later that week, as we were taking forward the practical steps required, the Cabinet Office initially said that as Mandelson was, to use the technical phrase from the guidance, a fit and proper person as a member of the House of Lords, he did not require developed vetting. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought that was odd and insufficient. I'd been Deputy Ambassador in Washington and therefore occasionally chargé, and I knew very well to do the job effectively, you have to be party to some of the deepest secrets that the UK government holds. But I also recognised that the situation was unusual, and I therefore asked for advice, although I was pretty clear in my own mind, from the SCDO security team. They came back to me after discussions with the Cabinet Office and said that their advice was that he should have DV, and I absolutely agreed with that. And by then the Cabinet Office had reflected further, and they also agreed. And that, if I remember right, that conversation started at the back end of the week of the 16th of December, at the time that the public announcement was made, and then by the beginning of the following week, just before Christmas, it was clear that that was going to be the requirement. That's what I'd thought, as it were, and I endorsed the advice. And at that point, Mandelson was sent the forms that you need to fill in to kick off the whole process.
I mean, we have had a bit of a he said, she said on this. We've got the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? And the Cabinet Office saying that the Foreign Office asked, does he really need DV? But you're down on the Foreign Office's side, that it was the Cabinet Office that said it first.
Look, I can't promise you who said what first.
Right.
I know what I was told. I was told the Cabinet Office suggested he didn't require DV. There clearly, self-evidently, was some further back and forth and consideration. And, I don't want to give you the impression that when we were taking forward the DV, there were people in the centre still saying, don't do that. By the beginning of the following week, everyone was agreed that he should have DV, and therefore it was now about taking that process forward. But I've given you my account of my memory of what I heard and what I thought at the time.
One thing is for sure, nobody made a note of it.
In the end, these were about practical arrangements rather than things which, are under, Chair, I know you've talked in previous hearings about civil servants writing everything down, but I also agree with those who've said to the committee that actually, if you're going to get work done, you simply cannot and do not have time to record every interaction. The key thing is, what was the decision? The decision was he required DV, and that is recorded.
So the decision was he required DV. That was your view. It was the view of the Foreign Office Security Department. Yet we know that prior to his obtaining DV clearance, he was given access to information which would usually require DV to have been completed. So how did that come about?
So you had I can't remember if it's 7 or 8 pages, but it's certainly lengthy and thorough response from the SCDO yesterday. You sent them a very long, not very long, I don't mean that in a critical way, a list of questions. I didn't mean long in a critical way. A list of questions, and they're very good questions. I think there are good answers in the SCDO's response. I recognise them from the consideration of the time. The context I was going to share on this point is you have a publicly announced ambassador designate to do the single most important ambassador job for the UK. You have a very, very compressed timescale you're being asked to meet for them to start their role in Washington. And you have the exceptional circumstances of an incoming Trump administration and a very high premium, therefore, in the new ambassador arriving as well briefed as possible in the short time available, recognising that normally ambassadors have several months to prepare for big jobs like this. And that required Mandelson to have access to briefings and papers to allow him to be properly prepared. And so, as reflected in what the Foreign Office said to you in the note last night, a decision was taken in line with the guidance that he should be given access to the building and access to the paperwork, in particular on, for example, the UK government's preparations and policies towards an incoming administration. And I was given that advice and I endorsed it, and I signed off on it. And I think it was the right thing to do to make sure that, as I say, the Prime Minister's choice for ambassador was properly prepared when he started his job. I think it would be very odd not to do that.
It does look odd, though, because he's got a green pass, which just means that he's got DV. And he had a DV pass on the very day that, according to the DV people, he should be recommended to not get DV. So on the day that Ollie Robbins is making his decision that it's borderline, Mandelson is wandering around the Foreign Office with a DV pass. There's a photograph of him going into the Foreign Office on that day.
Yeah, I don't know the answer on the actual type of pass. And it was clear to everybody, and I can't quite remember what the letter from the Foreign Office last night said, was that, and it was, I think, clear at the time, was that he didn't have DV, and there were limits to what he could see and told. And again, and I do think this is in the letter last night, but I can't quite remember. I do think there was a process in place to tell people who were going to brief him that there was a certain level of classification they could go up to in talking to him, and they couldn't go beyond that because he didn't have DV clearance.
Okay.
Can I just one final question? Just coming back to the answer you gave to the chair about your leaving your post. You said David Lammy told you that he wanted to make a change because of the transformation programme.
Yeah.
Do you believe that your concerns about the way in which Peter Mandelson had been appointed had any influence on the decision to ask you to leave early?
No, for a simple timing reason. I mean, I announced to the department I was leaving on the 4th of November 2024, and I didn't know anything about Mandelson until the middle of December. So the answer is straightforwardly no.
Afra, you wanted to follow up?
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to check with you. I mean, obviously, despite being head of the diplomatic service, you obviously hadn't been asked by Number 10 or the Prime Minister directly or indirectly your view on Peter Mandelson's suitability for the role. Had you been, would you have wanted to raise, or would you have said you had concerns about the reputational risks that he carried?
You know, I think that is genuinely a really hard question to answer, because hindsight is a fantastically wonderful thing, and it is hypothetical. But let me have a go at what I was thinking at the time. I mean, firstly, it's just worth repeating. At no point did anyone consult me, ask me. I was presented with a decision. There was no space, and told to get on with it. There was no space for dialogue. You know that. I think, look, it is the most important job we have. I had been deputy ambassador. I knew the US well from 10 years previously, and obviously worked a lot on the United States throughout my diplomatic career. So I think I had a sense and an understanding of US politics, which gave me an idea of what might or might not be a problem further down the track. And so I had a concern at the time. There was a part of me that had a concern at the time that I didn't know anything that wasn't in the public domain. Obviously, we know now a lot more about Mandelson's links to Epstein, but I had a concern that a man who, demonstrably from the public record at the time, and it's clearly much bigger than we all knew, had a link to Epstein, and that Epstein, through both the presidential election campaign in the US and more generally in US politics, had been and was a controversial figure. And I was worried that this could become a problem in future, not because I was expecting that we were going to find out more, because to be honest, I wasn't, and who would necessarily know, but much more, I just thought that it was a potentially difficult issue politically in the United States. So that is a very candid account of probably what I was thinking. Yeah. Thinking at the time, but there was no space or avenue or mechanism for me to put that on the table. A decision had been taken, and it was a political decision.
I mean, you mentioned, of course, the links to Jeffrey Epstein, which were in the media at the time. Did you have concerns about Mandelson's business relationships with China or Russia?
So please don't laugh, but I really didn't actually follow what Mandelson was up to in his business relationships. I kind of knew about him when he was a government minister, so I didn't sort of have it right in front of my face, and I didn't see the due diligence report. What the details of those were. What I would always believe in is a vetting process to look at issues which might affect national security.
And obviously you know the United States very well. Your previous diplomatic role there, you probably had links with people who are out there. Were you aware of any views that were expressed by the President's transitional team about concerns about Mandelson being given that post, or about Dame Karen Pierce being moved on from the post?
Well, I think there's quite a lot already in the public domain. There was at least one tweet from someone close to Trump, reminding people of what Mandelson had said about Trump many years before when he was president previously. I think those around Trump felt blindsided by the announcement at short notice, shall we say, and it was clear also that Karen and her team had done an excellent job in establishing relationships and access to President-elect Trump, and also when he was a candidate, doing their jobs. That's a hard thing to do, particularly in the political climate in the US, while maintaining good relations with the current administration. And Trump, has, again, on the record, had said that he'd like Karen and work well with her and be happy for her to stay. So that's a rather long-winded way of saying yes.
Thank you.
Can I just on what you were saying earlier about the DV and the access point? It's just to be fair on you, it is page 5 of the,
Thank you very much,
the
Chair.
statement
I
from
appreciate your help.
Pollard, it's paragraph 5, and it's where I believe that it says. Lord Mandelson's private secretary should, in advance, inform people that he was meeting that they knew he did not yet have DV clearance.
Thank you.
Okay. Richard.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sir Philip, for returning to the Foreign Affairs Committee to give evidence. The Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, was reflecting last September on the discussions that were had in government the year before about Lord Mandelson's appointment, and he reflected that that you, Sir Philip, had reservations. Can you remember what you were saying to the National Security Advisor about your reservations around appointing Lord Mandelson back in 2024?
I think it was very much along the lines of what I've just said around the possibility of his known connection to Epstein causing an issue subsequently. Obviously, I didn't know what was actually going to happen because Epstein was such a toxic hot potato subject in US politics itself, including in the election campaign. So that is what I recall thinking at the time, and I can't prove this because I don't know what Jonathan was thinking when he said it last September, but my instinct is that's what it refers to.
Okay. And then thinking later on that year about the Number 10 operation, do you recall any dismissiveness in Number 10 about the importance of vetting, and if so, how was that communicated to you?
I wouldn't use the word dismissive. The word I would use is uninterested. I think, people wanted to know that all the practical steps required for Mandelson to arrive in Washington on or around, by or around the inauguration date needed to be completed, at pace, as it were, and that was it. The interest. I mean, no one, to be honest with you, no one said to me, "Look, Philip, the Prime Minister knows some risks around this. Can you really make sure that the vetting's done rigorously?" I mean, it's always rigorous anyway, but that wasn't the sort of thing being communicated. The sort of thing was, fine, he needs vetting, make sure it's done in time.
Okay, thank you. Last week, when Sir Ollie gave evidence to the committee, I said that Sam Coates had reported words around "just to prove it." And I need to correct the record slightly because Sam Coates didn't actually report that. He didn't file a report. He did discuss it with a member of this committee. He didn't actually put it in writing. It didn't get off the cutting room floor. But it doesn't take away from the fact that his reply made plain that he had a strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this developed vetting. Could you comment on that atmosphere of pressure as you understood it in late 2024?
Can I just say one thing about the non-reported phone call and use of a particular word? I think it's important. I say this. Look, firstly, I didn't receive any direct calls from the Chief of Staff during my time as Permanent Undersecretary, so there was no call at all. So my interactions with him were always when others were present in a general meeting. There weren't very many of those either. This story or versions of it has been in the media persistently or floating around the media since last September. There's different versions, sometimes involving a swear word, sometimes not. And I've really racked my brains, and I cannot recall Morgan McSweeney swearing in a meeting at me, or indeed just in general. And so I don't see any substance in that part of it. And I think it's important I say that this morning, given how many people have come to think that might be true. In not answering your question, I've slightly forgotten what your actual question was. I know I didn't answer it. I did that on purpose. But can you just the headline at the end of your question? Sorry.
So Ollie, when replying last week, said that there was a an atmosphere of pressure and a certain dismissiveness about this DV process. And I wondered if you could comment on the atmosphere of pressure, please.
I think, where I would start is, on the 18th of December, I received a letter from the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister, and it's the one released as part of the humble address. I didn't receive letters from the Principal Private Secretary to the Prime Minister very often. Most of my dealings was with the Foreign Affairs team in the Number 10, as you'd expect. And the letter, as you know, basically says the Prime Minister has decided. And it then goes on to say, please could arrangements be put in place, was to that effect, for a handover by the inauguration, a very compressed timescale. And that, in effect, is the top of the government saying the Prime Minister has decided he wants Mandelson's ambassador, and he wants it done in that timescale. So that is what creates the pressure. There were conversations around progress, but I think no one in the FCDO working on this can have been in any doubt of the urgency of the issue and the importance that Number 10 and the Prime Minister attached to Mandelson being in DC in very short order.
Can I help you? On page
Yes.
22 of the bundle that's in front of you, the letter is there.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. I've got the letter. I mean, it's clear. It's clear. Please would you take forward the necessary arrangements at pace. We would like to secure Agrimore as soon as possible, the formal agreement of the US government, as it were, in terms
Read
of
the end of
Agrimore,
the sentence.
as soon as possible to enable a handover in advance of the US inauguration.
In advance of the US inauguration.
Yeah, at that point, that was the ambition at the start.
He's given the job on the 20th of December, and they want him at the US inauguration on the 20th of January.
Correct.
So you have a month.
Yes. Sorry, does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And I have another, and it relates to that time in December. And I just wanted to sort of try and get an idea for some of the events that were happening in December of 2024. The Prime Minister gave a speech on the 5th of December where he talked about the tepid bath. And just to recap for people not familiar with it, he said that people in Whitehall are comfortable in the tepid bath of managed decline. The implication was that the civil service was satisfied to stagnate and was not sufficiently reactive to political direction. I wonder whether that had any influence on the culture and the way in which the civil service was reacting to pressure around this political appointment.
I honestly don't think it did, actually. I honestly think the FCDO, once it was clear a decision had been taken and had been through the formal sign-off process with His Majesty the King, did what it always does, leant in and did its level best to deliver Minister's ambitions, in this case the Prime Minister's ambition. I think that would have done that whether or not the Prime Minister had made a speech about the civil service earlier in the month. To be honest with you, I think that's, actually think the Foreign Office and all the officials involved in the Cabinet Office and Number 10 as well. I mean, they all acted, in my view, certainly the ones I was collaborating with, in good faith at the time to try and deliver a very, very ambitious ask in terms of the timescale, because that was what the professional thing to do.
One more, Chair, if I may. The Prime Minister said at PMQs last week that, quote, no pressure existed whatsoever in relation to this case. How can that be squared with Sir Ollie's evidence last week where he said that there was a strong sense that there was an atmosphere of pressure?
I don't think it's for me to do evidence squaring, and obviously there's going to be other conversations around this, and I don't know who may or may not be asked to consider it in more detail. I'd have to ask you, what do you actually mean by your question? And the reason I asked you that, I'm not being difficult, because I think there's two possible questions here. Question one is, was there pressure on the substance of the DV case? Question 2 is, was there pressure to get the DV case done in a particular time frame? And they are different time frames. Sorry, they are different questions. And I worry.
You get us 2 answers.
I can give you 2 answers. I actually wrote down 2 answers, Chair, because I think there are two questions there. And I do think some of the problem with them is people are talking past each other because they're actually talking about different things. But anyway, I can't find my answers, but I'll give them to you anyway. So shall I just carry on, or do you want to ask?
No, carry on.
Answer 1 is, during my tenure, I was not aware of any pressure on the substance of the Mandelson DV case. Question 2, was there pressure? Absolutely, and I've described it, and I also have seen what the Foreign Office said to you last night, and recognise what is said in that letter about the pressure to get it done, i.e. DV clearance, by a particular timescale. Because as I said to you earlier, I don't think anyone could have been any doubt in the department working on this that there was pressure to get everything done as quickly as possible.
And I recognise your distinction between time pressure and pressure on the substance of the vetting process. But I think it's reasonable to suppose that one can affect the other. If there is time pressure, if there's a desire to get the ambassador out to Washington, D.C. before inauguration, then you can understand that the FCDO has the delegated power to give a recommendation around developed vetting, might also then lean on the substance as well as the timing.
Yeah. So, if I recall right, Sir Ollie, when he was giving evidence to you last week, said that there was pressure on the timescale, but that did not affect his decision-making on the substance of the case. And the letter from the FCDO last night says he, i.e. the Director ESND, does not assess that this pressure, the general pressure, influenced the professional judgment that was reached by himself or his team. And to be clear, I believe both of them.
Even though they didn't manage to read the last page?
Of what?
There was a 10-page document of the DV, and neither of them seemed to have read it. Was that anything to do with the time pressure or any other pressure?
I'm not aware of details of
the boxes.
Paper. Yeah, well, I'm not aware of the boxes. I've not seen a piece of paper with boxes on it either ever in my career. So,
Nobody seems to have seen them. Right, thank you. Afra, you've got one question, and then I'm moving on to Abdesam.
Just wanted to ask that given this tight time frame that there was, we're also aware that back in September of 2024, Lord Case, Simon Case, had written to the Prime Minister advising that security vetting should be carried out prior to the appointment of Peter Mandelson. But we know that the announcement, I think, was made on the 20th of December 2024, and it wasn't until 3 days later, as we've talked about, that security vetting commenced. So what would you say was the process in place at the time for the order of security vetting and appointment announcement, in your view?
Sorry, can you just unpack slightly what you mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I could
What would you say would be the normal order of process in place at the time? Would you say that the normal order would be vetting and then announcement?
Yes.
Or announcement and then vetting?
No, the normal order is vetting and then announcement.
Thank you.
Do you have any idea why it went the other way around?
No, the timing of the announcement was driven and decided by number 10.
Okay, thank you. Abdesam.
Thank you, Chair. So just following on from colleagues' questions in relation to pressure, what did that look like? I mean, were you receiving regular phone calls?
Yeah, so, I mean, I think it's important to, I'm not going to repeat myself, but it's important to remember the overall framing, in a sense. You know, you have the letter from the Principal Private Secretary, I won't repeat myself, but that provides the overall context. There were meetings in that week with number 10. There would have then have been regular progress chasing. There was discussion around the exact timetable that went on, and so there was, keen interest all the way through from number 10 that the practical arrangements required to get Mandelson to Washington in the timescale required or thereabouts was all moving forward. But in a sense, the pressure was kind of set at the beginning and just carried on. It wasn't a matter of did someone phone every day at 10 o'clock. It was much more this ambitious timetable has been set.
You referenced earlier Cabinet Office's fit and proper exemption, and you said that you thought this was odd and insufficient and unusual. Did you reference your concerns to number 10 or to the Cabinet Office?
I didn't need to be honest with you, because what I did was I asked the FCDO security team for advice, and then when the advice came back to me after their conversations with the Cabinet Office, at that point everyone was agreed that he needed DV.
So there were a number of emails that came out in the humble address subsequent to, well, prior to Mandelson being appointed. Was it normal for number 10 to be sending emails to prospective candidates?
No, I mean, I think, to be honest, I would cite, I mean, there's, for example, if I remember right, and I can check if you want, Chair, but if I remember right, one of the emails attached conflict of interest forms, which would normally be a departmental matter, and it was in the end agreed that the conflict of interest should be done by the FCDO. I think the fact that number 10 was at all points trying to accelerate arrangements was a strong signal of the time pressure that everyone was under. They were also trying to play their part. They were, stepping in to do things which might in the past have been left to the FCDO.
Mm-hmm. And in one of the emails, it references that you had a discussion with Mandelson. What was that discussion?
From memory, I had a intro chat with Mandelson on the Friday that his appointment was announced, and that was around practical matters of how the department would support him in his preparations to be the next ambassador now that had been announced.
Okay. And in one of the emails, it references that an iPad, laptop, iPhone was given to Mandelson. Is that usual practice to give to somebody who is not yet cleared?
It's not usual, but it's not unprecedented.
Okay, and the emails also referenced that he'd had briefings from senior officials at the FCDO. Were you aware of the content of those briefings?
I didn't, because obviously I wouldn't have had time. I wasn't aware of the precise every bit of it, but I was aware of the subjects that we were choosing to brief him on, and there was a kind of what you'd expect, a proper professional process run by the team in charge of our relationship with the United States to give him access, particularly to briefing on US government policy towards the incoming administration across a range of issues. And I remember seeing the list of issues, and I probably looked at it and thought, yes, that looks like a sensible list. But I didn't look myself at the briefing, and wouldn't have had or expect to do that.
In none of the emails, it makes reference to him being subject to cleared vetting. So it's almost as though he's got the job and we're just going through the process. Was there anything in any of the documents that said this is all subject to satisfactory DV?
As far as I recall and am aware, the first time the documentation shows subject to DV is when the FCDO sent him what is a standard form of words for people who are going into jobs. I'm not aware of any other references in the documentation.
I mean, would it be right to assume that had the final clearance been, would you foresee a situation where the final DV had been refused, that would have been rejected by the Cabinet Office? I mean, I can't foresee a situation where that would have happened, given how he was treated, and all the emails have implied that he has the job. Would you have foreseen a situation where it could have been refused?
Sorry, I'm not sure. What do you mean by that? Do you mean, is it a possibility, or do you mean...
Could it have been a possibility?
Well, I think, you start a vetting process. There has to be a possibility that at the end of that process, someone is deemed not to meet the standards to have, developed national security vetting.
What might have happened in this situation?
I mean, I don't know anything about the substance of the vetting. So, I really, no, I don't. I'm, sorry to say this again, a bit repeating what I said earlier. I at the time followed very much about Mandelson's wider life. I mean, it's not an impossibility. I mean, it would have been a crisis if we got to the point where he had no vetting clearance. That would have been a crisis. Self-evidently, a publicly announced political appointment as the next ambassador to Washington, not being able to go, that would have been a big problem.
But, I mean, presumably the DV is done with an open mind. And it's done with an open mind whether we're going to do DV, and if you fail it, you're not going to get the job. And so I think, the question is that there's an email which says that he's going to get briefed in person from the 6th of January onwards, including on higher tiers. Presumably that means equivalent of the sort of information you get if you got DV. He's got a pass for people who've got DV. This is before he gets DV. He's on the payroll from the 14th of January. I mean, it does all look like he's got the job already.
He got the job in the sense that he'd been announced by Number 10. The paperwork had gone to His Majesty the King. He'd been announced by Number 10. We were seeking the agreement of the US government. So in that sense, he had got the job.
What's the point in the DV?
Because to do the job, as I said, sorry, I should take the irritation out of it, I'm not irritated, but because to do the job effectively, you have to be able to have access to information that is of its sensitivity requires DV. So that's why he needed DV.
If he'd been failed, he would have had access to the buildings as if he had DV. He would have had access to information as if he'd had DV, and he would have failed it because he would have been seen as a security risk, and you would have exposed yourselves to him as a security risk during the period.
I don't agree that with your kind of characterisation of as though he had DV. He had access to the building, but parts of the building where people without DV also have access. He did not have access.
Why did he have a green pass?
He did not. I don't. You'll have to ask the Foreign Office about the passes. He did not have access to the parts of the building where you absolutely do require DV. And on the paperwork, and I think this is in the Foreign Office letter, he had access under the rules as allowed as a fit and proper person and a member of the House of Lords. He had access to papers up to a certain level of classification. He didn't have general access. He wasn't able to roam free, if you like, in terms of access to information across the department. So I can understand why it looks odd. I actually think it was the right thing to do to ensure at the time that in the short time scale that had been given, he could arrive in Washington properly prepared. The alternative would have been that we would have had an ambassador to the United States turning up not properly or fully briefed on the government's policies towards an incoming administration, and that would not have been right. It wouldn't have been proper for the Foreign Office to operate in that way. So I'm comfortable that it was the right decision at that point in time to give him that limited access under the rules.
So is this a fair way of putting it? That given that he'd been offered the job on the 20th of December, and you've got Christmas and New Year in the way, and he's got to be getting to Washington by the 20th of January, you were doing everything that you could to accommodate him being ready for that date?
Within the rules.
Was there a contingency plan in place for what might happen if he wasn't granted security clearance?
No.
Well done.
Yeah, Edward.
Sorry.
Edward.
Thank you, Chair. So, Philip, you said that you were informed by the Principal Private Secretary in Number 10 on the 15th.
18th.
On the 18th.
Sorry, I know the word principal. I was informed by a Private Secretary Number 10 on the 15th.
On the 15th.
Yes.
That the Prime Minister wanted to appoint Peter Mandelson.
Yes.
Was that a conversation? Because there's obviously then subsequently the letter.
Yeah, I was phoned up.
You were phoned up. The letter just references the desire to appoint Peter Mandelson. your letter to the Private Secretary,
Yeah.
to the King,
Yeah.
says that the Prime Minister has indicated his intention to recommend a small number of political appointments. So when you had the conversation on the 15th, that presumably was that the PM will make a number of appointments.
To be honest, I can't recall. I don't think he did. I think, to be honest with you, I think that the first sentence of my letter, that was a catch-all sentence, which I think was the way it was described to your colleague in your hearing with Cat Little. It was non-specific. It was a non-specific general catch-all rather than because I was being told there's more coming.
Well, so obviously in his evidence, Sir Ollie Robbins said that he was asked, or another name was floated to him, Matthew Doyle, and not only that, he was asked to keep that information from the Foreign Secretary. If not during the conversation on the 15th, at any subsequent point were any other names floated to you for potential political appointees?
Not by the Labour government. And the first I knew about Matthew Doyle was when Sir Ollie gave you evidence.
And in any conversations with Number 10, were you ever asked to withhold information from the Foreign Secretary?
Ever?
Well, okay, so with the current administration, we should put on record, you have served under 4 different Prime Ministers. So let's establish at any point during your tenure as PermSec, were you asked by a Number 10 organisation to withhold information from the Foreign Secretary? How usual is that for that request?
I mean, I'm worried that everyone's going to think that the centre of government spends its whole time sort of conniving behind the backs of everyone else in government, and that's not the reality. The reality is, people trying to get on with delivering the business of the government, the vast majority of the time. I think my best answer to that question is unusual. But in the end, and I'd say it's particularly around things where you might have a policy disagreement or difference of view between the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, it is not unheard of for permanent secretaries, in a sense, to try and work in a way which allows there to be a decision and a consensus view, and the government can then move ahead and take it forward. And in that sort of situation, it's not unheard of for a permanent secretary to be privy to something that they don't pass on to, or are asked not to, rather, pass on to their Secretary of State. So I would describe it as not unheard of, but I don't want to give the impression that this is going to standard operating procedure.
This is extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. So the Foreign Secretary, so the permanent secretary at the Foreign Office can be told, don't tell your boss about this when they are the Foreign Secretary. Is it? I mean, has that ever happened to you before this?
Yes, it has.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, you learn something new every day.
I suppose it begs the question, does that operate in the other way? Because a lot of this seems to come down to what the Prime Minister was told and when. So how frequently are people being asked to withhold information from the Prime Minister? Has that happened as well?
I can't speak for Number 10 or the Prime Minister. I would never say to Number 10, you can't tell the Prime Minister. And I always work on the assumption if I'm speaking to Number 10, there's a possibility, and that's for them to judge, that the information I'm relaying to Number 10 might go to the Prime Minister.
Because much of this does seem to hinge on how much the Prime Minister knew when he was making a decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, and the briefing that he may or may not got. So
I can't help you with that because I wasn't involved.
I appreciate that. You said that you weren't involved in the decision-making process around Peter Mandelson because it was a political appointment. Was the Foreign Secretary involved in the decision-making?
I don't know.
Okay. I mentioned already you served under 4 Prime Ministers. Search through the records, and you can correct me on this, suggests that the only other political appointment that happened during your tenure as PermSec was Sir George Hollenberry, who was the former Member of Parliament for Meon Valley and was appointed ambassador to Cuba during the Johnson administration. Comparing those 2 processes and the timelines, how markedly different was the Mandelson appointment compared with the process that was taken out for the appointment of Sir George Hollenberry?
You might need to get chapter and verse on this from the FCDO. during my tenure, the only two serving political appointees were Lord Llewellyn, Paris, then Rome, and you're quite right, Sir George Hollingbury in Cuba. I can't absolutely promise you, because I started in September 2020 at the height of COVID and had to lead a complex merger, but from memory, George Hollingbury's appointment was done before I started, even if he didn't take up post until after I started. But certainly I wasn't involved in doing anything around his appointment. I think it was already on the, I think it was already certainly decided, even if it hadn't been announced, and then it was taken forward in what I would describe as the normal way for an ambassadorial appointment, with time to go through the steps in the normal sequence, if that answers your question.
It does, thank you. More broadly, in terms of the process then, you've already mentioned that you have never seen the now infamous traffic light boxes. Apparently, according to the letter we received last night, the departmental head of security had also never seen the traffic light boxes, wasn't aware that it was. So Ollie has talked us through the fact that he had a meeting with the head of security. Have you ever had a meeting with the head of security to discuss whether or not somebody should be cleared DV in your time as PEMSEC?
No, I don't recall a recommendation from UKSV ever being escalated to me during my tenure.
That was unique. Given that you had never had cause to see the traffic light system, should we read anything into the fact that Sir Ollie, when he had that meeting, was not shown it?
I would rest on what you were told in the FCDO's letter last night.
I'll just pick up on one point.
At one point and then anyway.
But, so in the letter last night it says this is unusual where there's a difference between UKSV recommendation and FCDO sign-off, but it says there's more than one a month. So,
sorry, the door opened. I misheard the last end of the.
The letter last night says that it's unusual, but not exceptional, for UKSV recommendations to differ to the final FCDO decision on vetting, but it says there's more than one a month of those cases. But you're saying that they're not raised to permanent secretary level.
Correct.
Who would then make that decision?
I think that's set out in the letter, if I remember right. It sets out the decision-making hierarchy, but you would have to get chapter and verse from the department.
Emma.
Thank you, Chair. If you'd become aware, Sir Philip, that there were issues with UKSV, given how high profile this appointment is, would you have raised this with the Foreign Secretary?
I genuinely don't think that's a question I can answer, because I don't know rightly. I don't know anything about the substance of the concerns. So, what I would say to you is that, you know, when you're a permanent secretary, you have what I describe as crucible moments. And you are basically being asked to decide something sensitive, sometimes under time pressure, and you can't discuss that with anybody. And I really don't think that I can second guess somebody's decision in those circumstances when I'm not in them and don't have the information and the environment of that time.
I understand, but Sir Philip, you've said that it's very unusual for security matters to be raised, and that, certainly in your time that had never happened. Given how unusual it was, and given the media spotlight on this already very controversial decision to appoint Peter Mandelson, and looking at that Civil Service Code of Conduct, well, there's an expectation for ministers to be briefed properly by the civil service. Would you have exercised your judgment to say, actually, this is one of those times I perhaps need a conversation with the Foreign Secretary?
Yeah, you know, I can't.
It's 10 o'clock. You're watching Sky News, where we're following live developments from Westminster, where the Foreign Affairs Select Committee is hearing evidence related to the vetting of Peter Mandelson.
Knowing where, I can't tell you what I would have done. I just actually don't know.
I understand. Do you recall your conversation with Sir Ollie regarding the handover of this decision? And in that conversation, did you discuss any of the pressures, whether that be time pressure or the kind of political pressure?
Yeah, I'm sure that I gave. That we had about a week, but he spent a certain amount of that time talking to other people and reading documents, and we had a conversation at the beginning of the week, and at the end of the week we had a longish meeting where I kind of went through some of the senior personnel issues, talked about some of the future appointments that were coming up, and how he might want to think about that, and what you'd expect in a professional handover, and kind of some of the things that I knew or wanted him to know that perhaps weren't. I was probably the best placed person to actually tell him all of that, and so I did, as part of that, describe to him in headline terms the process that had been through and where we got to in the appointment of Mandelson and the preparations for him to arrive in Washington.
And as part of that process, did you raise any concerns that you had personally about this, or any of your risks that you thought may arise as a result of it?
My memory is we had a general conversation mostly about what had happened, where they got to. The one thing I do remember discussing and agreeing with Ollie is how we would handle the conflict of interest form. I'd seen a draft of it and had commented on it, but it was, and Ollie and I agreed this, it was, I felt and he felt, something that wasn't sensible for me to sign off in my final week, not least because he was going to have to justify whatever anything was in there. So I do remember a conversation around how best to handle the conflict of interest in the transition from me to him.
Understood. In your earlier answers, you spoke to the chair about the pressure to get the ambassador in post before the inauguration, and Christmas and other time pressures notwithstanding, that's why you did the process as you did. Would you have briefed anyone else who is considered for that post if they weren't a political appointment? Let's say it was not Peter Mandelson and it wasn't a political appointment, but you knew this was the most likely candidate. Do you think that same thing would have happened?
Yes.
Okay. And on this announcement, you said that the normal order was the vetting to happen first and the announcement second, but obviously you say it's number 10's decision for it to have gone in this order. Did you know that that was going to happen? Were you aware that it was being announced?
When did I know it was going to be announced? I think probably by the end of the 18th of December, certainly by the morning of the 9th, on the 9th, either the end of the 18th or beginning of the Thursday, I knew number 10 were going to announce the following day.
And did you warn of any risks of proceeding this way? Did you speak to either the Foreign Secretary or anyone in number 10 or anyone else in the department?
Well, the die was cast, to be honest. So I think we had a discussion around practicalities.
There wasn't any intervention from you as...
In what regard?
That there are risks of proceeding this way, that the normal process is the vetting happens first and the announcement second. And by going ahead with this timeline, that's not the normal process. And at number 10 and the Foreign Office could be open to criticism and or process.
I mean, to be honest, I think that, as I say, the die was cast. The Prime Minister had decided, the timetable was set, number 10 wanted to announce.
Thank you.
I still don't understand this, because if the die was so set that you weren't in a position to say, I don't think this is a good idea, I think you should do DV first before the announcement, and yet you say it still wouldn't have been a problem. If he'd failed his DV, we would have announced that.
I think the difference is if there'd been, and I'm talking in the generic here, obviously, because I don't know anything about the substance, but generically, if there'd been sufficient material, in any case, you've got, you're talking about the beginning of the process and the end of the process. You're talking about, beginning of the process is one thing. End of the process is a different thing because you've got a body of material.
I think who have I got next?
Alan for one question.
Oh, sorry. And I've got Alan for one question and then I've got Fleur.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Philip, I should put on record that you and I worked briefly together when you were High Commissioner to India, and I was Her Majesty's then Trade Commissioner, a job for which I had to get DV.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. The issue we're struggling with in part is judgment, and one of the main problems is that initial judgment to appoint Peter Mandelson was flawed. Some are trying to say that the FCDO process, the vetting process, could have corrected that flawed initial decision. But is it fair to say that when you look at Ian Collard's response, politicians inserted enormous risk into the system by appointing Peter Mandelson, and what Ollie Robbins and the FCDO did was use their processes legitimately to manage that risk? Or do you think they were outside of that standard FCDO process?
I don't know anything about the substance, and I have no view, therefore, on judgments arraigned around the substance. I do think what they did, as I understand it, was within the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you very much, Sir Philip, for coming to give us evidence today. I've got some questions about the due diligence part of the process. Were there any other FCDO appointments like this when you were told about the due diligence and it was an FCDO appointment after the due diligence had been done?
I'm not aware, for ambassador jobs, of any due diligence being done of this sort of form. It's not part of a normal civil service process. So I don't recognise it.
In your experience, have you had experience of people not passing due diligence? So is it a process which is a pass or fail then?
It's not a process. It's not a standard process. I mean, the closest I can come to is, for example, this may be a total red herring, so if you want me to stop, I'll stop. But recruitment for non-executive directors of departments. Obviously outsiders, because that's the point. They have in the past been subject to a look at their social media profile and that sort of thing to see whether that throws up anything which make them unsuitable for a non-executive role in a government department. But I mean, it's a bit different. But that is the closest comparative in terms of appointment processes to full-time on the books jobs rather than a non-executive role. I'm certainly in the FCDO. It's not part of the process, and certainly not for ambassador jobs.
And so just a bit more on the process. So you were told about it on a phone call on the 15th of December, but you weren't given the due diligence checklist, which I've got in front of us. It's part of the humble address papers that had already been completed. Did you see the conflict of interest paper at that time?
No, because it wasn't completed. It was basically sent to Mandelson, if I remember right, the following week or the week after. Let me just check to make sure I give you the right date. On the conflict of interest, I saw that over the weekend of, I think it was the 4th and 5th of January, and I had some points on it. Either, I didn't, further points I wanted addressed. And so I remember actually writing an email, because it was a Sunday. I wrote an email setting out those points.
Who did you write the email to?
My office. Someone in the department dealing with it.
Okay. And were they... So they were the concerns which would have been raised by the due diligence form about the different things we can see here. Epstein, for example, was in that. But
I think I can't speak to due diligence. I wasn't involved. On the conflict of interest forms, a clear form which you fill out, setting out areas in which in your life that might create a conflict, and then there's a process with the line manager, and the Ambassador Washington is managed by the Permanent Undersecretary to agree whether that conflict's surmountable or not, and if mitigations and so on.
And is there a precedent of you seeing a due diligence form? Do you think or for asking? I know this is an unusual appointment because the Cabinet Office did the due diligence, so you didn't see it. Could you have asked for the FCDO to also do due diligence, seeing that you were going to be Peter Mandelson's line manager, and so that you were directly responsible in that way?
Yeah, if I remember right, I think I asked to see it and was told it formed advice to the Prime Minister, and therefore wasn't something I could see. Look, I think what you're suggesting is that I've been told the Prime Minister had due diligence done. He's seen it, decided this, and I'm going to say, well, that's not good enough for me. I'm going to do my own due diligence. I don't think that's plausible. Obviously, there was the pre-existing conflict of interest process and national security vetting processes which were gone through.
Just to be clear, in that week, I think you've been asked before about did you raise this with the Foreign Secretary? So this week of the 15th, you were told, the 18th it became public. Did you have a conversation with the Foreign Secretary during that week to say, this is the most high-profile appointment, it's a very controversial appointment, it seems...
I was clear in my own mind that I needed to know the Foreign Secretary was content before I went to His Majesty the King to seek his agreement. Diplomatic service appointment, ambassador, ultimately, obviously Prime Minister involved as well, but responsible to the Foreign Secretary. If I remember right, the Monday was the day of the annual Australia-UK ministerial meeting, which both the Foreign Secretary and I, pretty busy, both in our own rights. My counterpart was here as well as Penny Wong, but also together in joint meetings for much of the day. My memory is that I had a brief word in the margins of that to relay to the Foreign Secretary what I had been told. And if I remember right, he said he would talk to number 10.
Okay. So you were told by a phone call, then you were in the same meeting together, and then you said, I've been told that this is going to happen, and the Foreign Secretary said he would have words with number 10 after that. And then did you hear anything back from that?
I didn't say he would have words, which obviously can be read differently.
No, let's make this very clear.
He said he would talk to
He would talk to number 10 about that. And did you hear back from that before it was then you wrote that letter to say he was appointed?
So yes, I had the letter from the Principal Private Secretary of Foreign Affairs on the morning of the Wednesday the 18th. I established the Foreign Secretary was content for me to take forward the process, and I then wrote to Sir Clive, and the letter's part of the release, as you know.
Is there any record of that meeting where you had an establishment of the Foreign Secretary?
He was travelling, and I had a exchange with someone in the travelling party and had a message back. He was content for me to write. He was on his way, I think, to a dinner of NATO foreign ministers.
Can I just follow up on this? So you've said that there was, the purpose of due diligence is to look at reputational risks, yeah? And so if I was Foreign Secretary and one of my ambassadors had gone rogue, it would be for me to be answerable for that, right? So surely it's important in those circumstances for me to see the due diligence.
I don't know the extent to which the Foreign Secretary was involved prior to the Prime Minister's decision.
I don't understand what that answer is. You said that you'd asked to see the due diligence and you were told that it was something for the Prime Minister, and now you've given whatever answer that is.
Sorry, Chair, would you mind repeating the question? Would you just repeat the question to make sure I haven't...
Did the Foreign Secretary see the due diligence or not before you tell the King, I've discussed this with the Foreign Secretary who agrees with the recommendation?
I'm not aware that he saw it.
Are you aware that the Deputy Prime Minister has now said that there were worries about Peter Mandelson's appointment at the time? And he said to LBC that there was a discussion within government, but that ultimately it was a matter for number 10.
I saw the media report at the time.
Is that all you're going to tell me?
Chair, honestly, I'm not being difficult. If you ask me a question, I will answer it. But I should also say I'm obviously not here to speak for the Foreign Secretary. You kindly pointed out at the beginning I'm not a civil servant anymore.
Have a view on the accuracy of the statement.
Just read it again. I think you should ask the Foreign... If you want to know the Foreign Secretary's views, I don't really feel...
But you were there in the middle of all of this, right? You were there in the middle of all of this. The Foreign Secretary is your boss.
Fair enough.
The Foreign Secretary... You're telling us that the Foreign Secretary was happy, and you told the King that. The Foreign Secretary, now the former Foreign Secretary, now the Deputy Prime Minister, is saying actually that there were concerns and there were discussions going on, which is true.
Got it. So I'm not being unhelpful, I promise you. Let me put it this way. I was asked what the Foreign Secretary said when I told him. He did not say, Philip, please crack on, write to the King. He actually said, I'm going to talk to number 10.
That's it.
That's because we were in the margins of big important meetings with the top of the Australian foreign and security system in what is always a very pressurised period in the run-up to Christmas, and this was about a political appointment. He was my political boss as foreign secretary. I gave him the information I'd been told. He said he would talk to number 10.
A follow-up to that, Sir Philip. So yesterday, the former Foreign Secretary, now Deputy Prime Minister, said, as the Chair said, that he'd expressed worries. And you said this was a conversation in the margins. But again, back to how serious an appointment this is and the level of media scrutiny already rightly on this appointment. Did you have any further conversations with the then Foreign Secretary about these worries?
As I recall, he and I had a brief conversation. I can't remember if it was the 18th or the 17th or the 18th, so the Tuesday or the Wednesday. It was inconclusive, so he wasn't at that point saying he was content for me to proceed, and I hadn't in any case received what I asked for at the outset. I said at the outset to number 10, I'm not doing anything until I've got something in writing. And at the point of that conversation, I hadn't received a letter from the principal private secretary, and so we had an inconclusive conversation.
Did you raise any of your concerns with him for him to make a judgment to pass this on or anything like that? Was there any conversation about the worries that you both seem to have had?
I think the Foreign Secretary should speak for himself on his views and what was said, as it were. I, at that point, was doing my best to resolve the situation, establish what I was being asked to do by the top of the government, and then take the bureaucratic steps necessary either way.
So it was a situation that needed to be resolved during that week. Do you think the process of that week, the due diligence part of this, is evidence of, and the timings of it, is evidence of pressure or undue pressure, or evidence of due process being followed?
I'm really sorry, but I'm not sure I follow you.
The fact that, it's very, by your own admission, it's very unusual, and it was an unusual appointment, of a political appointment. So it was this whole process tested the system to the limit, really, and we're looking at how the system worked in this case, but also what we need to learn for the future. But just the evidence of, you were already told, quite late on in the process, due diligence had been done, then you were told he was going to be appointed, and then it was very publicly announced very quickly, and then so all of that, the timing of it, is that, in your opinion, evidence of pressure, undue pressure, or evidence of due process being followed at pace, yes, and you're in a high pressure environment all the time in your role?
The short timescale created the pressure, as I said earlier. In terms of the parts that the FCDA and I was responsible for, I mentioned conflict of interest or vetting, and other decisions. I'm very confident they were taken, albeit under pressure, properly. As I've already been clear, the number 10 decision to announce in advance of DV was unusual.
And final one from me. With the benefit of hindsight and many months to look at this and think about this whole process, where did the process go wrong? Was it at that early stage of even considering him, or was it the due diligence, or was it the vetting? Where did the process go wrong in your view?
I don't have complete knowledge or insight into the process prior to the Prime Minister's decision, so I can't answer that question.
You told us that it's the normal process to do vetting and then announcement. So for comparison purposes, when it came to the appointment of Jonathan Powell, was he vetted and then announced?
I wasn't involved in his appointment.
Oh, he's not Foreign Office.
He's a National Security Advisor, it's a Cabinet Office role.
What about when he was Special Envoy for the British Indian Ocean Territories?
Envoys are different and are dealt with differently. I honestly can't remember the secrecy on that, so you'd need to ask the department.
Alex.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sir Philip. You've talked about the short timescale causing problems. Do you think there was a reasonable diplomatic reason why Number 10 wanted the appointment done by Trump's inauguration?
Look, I think once the Prime Minister's decided they want a change of very high-profile ambassador, you don't want to wait too long. You don't want to get on with making that change. I mean, my own view wasn't essential for Mandelson to be there by the time of the inauguration. Always takes a while for US governments to form because of the confirmation process. It's actually quite quick in Trump 2 compared to Trump 1, but it does take weeks. So I was personally much less concerned and didn't see that as an absolutely essential thing. And of course, Karen Pierce was willing to stay longer and be flexible within reason, and be well respected and connected to the Trump transition team. So yes, I can see entirely the point of getting on with it. I wasn't quite convinced that we had to see the 20th of January as a deadline, but that was the one we'd been set, very clearly, and communicated by the top of the government.
Did you say that to Number 10?
To be honest, I think, I would have been clear that we didn't have to, but I think in the end they were getting with it. It's also true that in the end Lord Mandelson didn't go until after the inauguration.
Any other external appointments, including political appointments, but others, are there examples where somebody has started in post before they've received their DV and then had access to those materials?
I'm not aware of an ambassador starting in post, certainly externally, without DV. I mean, I can't speak for history, if you know what I mean, but in recent times, no.
And do you think the argument that because Lord Mandelson was a Privy Councillor, he wouldn't need DV clearance was credible at all?
As I said, my initial reaction was that it was odd and insufficient. So no, which is why I asked for advice. But but we did also pretty quickly settle on he needed DV.
And you said higher classifications of material that he wouldn't have access to. What level of classification before he received his DV was Mandelson able to access?
I think it's in the letter, but I think it was up to secret, 0.5, page whatever it is. It's in there. So up to secret was allowed.
So there were no briefings he was given above that level of classification before he received vetting?
Not that I'm aware of.
Did the intelligence agencies ever share any concerns with you about Mandelson's appointment or his access to information?
No.
Thank you. Knowing what you know now about Peter Mandelson's relationship with Epstein and everything else, do you think the DV process made or UKSV made the correct decision and the FCDO made the correct decision?
I'm not aware of any of the substance of the DV process. I genuinely can't answer that question.
Does it change your view on the appropriateness of political appointments to ambassadorial positions at all?
I mean, this one self-evidently hasn't worked out, but Lord Llewellyn was a brilliant ambassador to Paris and then Rome, and George Hollenbury did a good job in Cuba, and the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary are absolutely entitled, and it's explicitly allowed for in the legislation, to make political appointments. So I don't have any objection. I mean, clearly, when I was head of the diplomatic service, I was head of the diplomatic profession, and inevitably you kind of, you're not quite chief. You're head of the tribe, even if you're not chief trade unionist. So, within reason, they're a good idea. But, personally, as a diplomat, I would argue that the vast majority of jobs should go to diplomats, but they have been successfully used in the past.
Okay. And finally, do you think the Prime Minister's statement that full due process was followed is a fair description of what happened in Mandelson's case?
I'm going to dodge. I'm really sorry, but I just actually don't think it's for me to sit here it's not for me it's for others, including, all of you as members of Parliament to come to a view on that.
So as your permanent secretary, would you have said in another case?
Okay, let me. I mean, I'm not going to answer your question. Let me describe what I've said to you in my mind to you today. So as I said, I think the processes, the FCDO, the bit I was responsible for, followed up until I stepped down on Sunday the 19th of January. That was proper process, done at pace as we were asked. It was unusual, and I wasn't involved in this, I was involved but not responsible. It was unusual for the announcement to be made before he received DV.
Thank you, sir.
I've got a question from Edward and from Afra, so let me go to Edward first.
I think it sort of follows on from what Alex was asking you, Philip. You're requesting to see the due diligence report. You're flagging to the Foreign Secretary that you have concerns. Sir Ollie, in his evidence, told us that this was the only time in which the Security Department requested to see him in respect to whether or not to grant clearance. You've told us that during your tenure there was no situation in which you'd met with the Security Department regarding granting clearance. Is there any precedence for this number of red flags to be raised on an appointment?
I think that's really an impossible, I'm sort of tempted to I don't know, that's a really an impossible question for me to answer. If you're talking about, no, it is, because any appointment,
You don't mean to narrow it down.
Previous governments of different political persuasions over time have made, shall I say, not the smartest appointments in a whole different areas. But if you ask me, if I reframe your question as around an appointment to an ambassadorial role during my tenure, then the answer is yes. Or no, rather. I mean, not as many, whichever agrees with the thrust of your question, but that's yes or no.
Okay. All right.
Good answer.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask a very quick follow-up question to one of the ones that Alex talked about to do with the types and levels of classified information that Peter Mandelson saw prior to going out to the US. Would you have expected the ambassador to the US to be briefed on and to know what was in the China audit?
So I'd left, unfortunately, before the China audit had been completed. So I'm slightly hamstrung by knowing the absolute classification of that and quite how because some of the things about our China policy obviously are very, very highly classified. So I'm not ducking, but I don't really know, because it may be actually there was, and it also, if I remember, it wasn't complete at that point. It wasn't completed before I left. So my guess is on China, Lord Mandelson would have been told a fair amount, but there would have been some things which were a higher classification that he wouldn't have been able to know until later. But I'm surmising rather than knowing, and to be honest with you.
I mean, so I completely understand that. You said you're guessing that. But were you aware that it was expected that briefings would include some information about the work that was being undertaken as part of the China audit?
I would have expected him to have been briefed on the evolution of the government's policy on China, so that he was ready to talk to the US administration about the UK government's policy on China, i.e. doing his job. And that must have included, therefore, him being briefed on where the government's audit of China policy had got to, if that answers your question. So you said basically yes.
Thank you.
Alan and then Dan.
Thank you, Chair. Sir Philip, was the correct process followed in the dismissal of Ollie Robbins?
Save the easy questions for last. Look, I don't think I can answer that question, and it's clearly going to be a matter of, or may become a matter of formal legal dispute. I guess what I can say is when I was Permanent Under Secretary, there were a number of very serious disciplinary cases during my time leading to dismissal, and they all involved some process. But only the Prime Minister, Sir Ollie, and those involved know what happened, and I don't. So I can't can't answer your question.
But in your cases, you would probably see someone suspended and an investigation taking place, or something as summarily dismissal as we've seen?
In a serious gross misconduct case in the FCDO, so for an FCDO member of staff, however serious, in my time, it was going to suspension and at least one case removal from post for overseas ambassador, and then a very short period to do a formal process.
Thank you. I want to ask about the due diligence report, but does anyone else want to come in on?
I think Uma wants to come in on the back of that, if you don't mind, and then we'll go back to you again.
Thanks, Chair.
The question, Sir Philip, on the judgment about the reasons for why Sir Ollie left his post. Would you have informed Number 10 or the Prime Minister of the concerns about Peter Mandelson and those leaked emails and the emails released by the US Department of Justice after the decision to sack Mandelson? If the view from the civil service is that you don't inform your principal before, surely after, when all this information's in the public domain, would you have intervened?
I don't think I can answer that question for the reason I sort of gave earlier about not being in the moment. I mean, I recognise the Prime Minister clearly believes genuinely he should have been told. So Ollie set out for you his view, including, if I understood him right, that he felt he was bound by the rules not to discuss the information from the vetting process, although that's now disputed, and you had different evidence from Cat Little. So, I personally think it's a very good thing that someone as Adrian Fulford's stature has been asked to look into this, because we can't be in this damaging situation again. But I'm afraid I just actually can't answer your question. But we do need a proper look at this because it is very damaging.
I'd agree, Chair. If you can let me ask one final question. This is a hugely significant decision. This appointment, it had national and international repercussions as well as reputational risk. There's a well-publicised friendship of Jeffrey Epstein, and the FCDO and the civil service's view time and time again has been that they can't intervene because the rules don't let them intervene, or to take a passive approach. Do you think, given everything we know, the system should be changed going forward?
I don't know the answer to that question, which is why I'm pleased that Adrian Fulford, who I know from his time when he was, I think, the first head of the investigation, he was the first Investigatory Powers Commissioner, and also, if I remember right, may still do, has been the final appeal for vetting cases, so clearly knows a lot about it. I think he is the right person to get actually at that question. It's definitely right to look at it.
Back to Anne.
Thanks. In the follow-up to her evidence to the committee, Cat Little confirmed there was no Cabinet Office advice ahead of the decision that Morgan McSweeney and Matthew Doyle should follow up questions with Peter Mandelson about Epstein. Have you any views on whether you thought they were the right people to do that, or whether someone independent of the process or someone trained in vetting would have been better to follow up?
It wasn't part of the vetting. It wasn't part. So
the due diligence process.
Yeah, no. What do I think about that? Look, it was a political appointment with a process being run out of Number 10 and a due diligence conducted by the Centre in a way that I've already said is not part of normal civil service practices. So I think in the end, who is doing the questioning and whether that's appropriate comes down to who and what weight is being put on those questions and who answers them. And so in a sense, I just actually genuinely don't know, because it wasn't me making the decision. I wasn't involved in it. It wasn't therefore for me to kind of say, well, that's good enough or not good enough as the conduit for the questions. I wasn't being asked or ever involved in putting any faith in that conduit.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Anne and then John.
Thanks, Chair. We've gone around this issue of due diligence, vetting, over and over again. I am surprised that you have never seen a DV report, but is that correct?
The only papers I saw on DV was in my formal role as the permanent secretary in signing off the outcomes of appeals. So someone being refused has the right to appeal, and those papers would come to me, but they did not include vetting files. Aside from those appeal papers and the forms I filled out for my own vetting, I have never seen vetting papers.
And so that would align with what Sir Ollie has told us about having only an oral briefing, where we now have two, him and Ian Collard telling us that this was a borderline case.
Yeah, although, just to repeat what I said earlier, a case was never escalated to me in that way.
And then what this committee has been led to believe, I think, that red flags and denials of clearance were part of this. So I'm just... the bit I think you can help us with is the process through which Ollie Robbins finds himself sacked, because you've been following this as closely as anybody else. I mean, just to phrase the question differently, do you understand why Sir Ollie Robbins has been sacked?
I have not seen the letter he was sent, so I cannot, and I don't speak for him, and neither do I speak for the government. So I can't sit here today and say I know. And I note also that Ollie was very clear in his evidence to you in basically saying he wasn't going to talk about that.
But in the end, the FCDO is a make recommendation department because it takes responsibility for passing clearance. It has the power to manage risks and to mitigate those risks, and that is the process that all of the evidence that we've seen shows us has happened, which also aligns with what the Prime Minister has said, that due process was followed.
That sounds right to me, and I read carefully last night the letter the Foreign Office sent to you, and I wasn't directly involved in anything after the 19th of January, but it rang true.
I'll go to John, and then Fleur's going to ask the last question.
You'll be aware that a number of former very senior civil servants have spoken about how damaging this episode has been on the civil service. As a former very experienced permanent secretary and head of the diplomatic service, what is your assessment of how this has affected the civil service and in particular the diplomatic service?
I mean, Sir John, thank you for that question, because I think I'm glad you asked it. It's a very important one. I think it's also important to remember the kind of wider context. Look, the British system of government works best when civil servants and ministers, including at the highest level, work together effectively to deliver the elected government of the day's programme, but respecting that they've got slightly different jobs and roles and responsibilities. And whenever that isn't happening, and that isn't happening effectively, then you're not able to deliver as well. So I do think a situation, and you need to have load-bearing relationships at the most senior levels as well. So I do think there's a challenge now, and I think it's incumbent on all of us, including people no longer in government who can perhaps help from the sidelines, to try and get back to a situation where the government of the day and the leaderships of the government of the day and the civil service of the day have trusting relationships, understanding they've both got different pressures on them, different roles under pressure and slightly different roles, but need to work together as a team to deliver for the country.
And the trusting relationship at present, do you think, is broken down?
I don't like sort of black and white terminology like broken down. I do think self-evidently that there are now challenges, at least for some people in the relationships.
Not least people who think they're in charge of their departments, who understand that their permanent secretaries have been told not to tell them things.
Fire politician.
I've got one more question, one more piece of the puzzle, which is about going back to access talks that you held with what were then shadow ministers before the election. Did the issue of political appointments, the appointment of the ambassador to the US, or appointing Peter Mandelson come up in access talks? Would they have been recorded?
Yeah, if you're asking to say were there records of if your question is were there records of access talks, the answer is yes.
Okay.
If your question is were these aspects recorded, I'm really sorry, but I can't actually remember the rules. But at the time, there was an absolute omerta around the contents of the access talks, and I'm going to be cautious, even though I'm no longer a civil servant, because I'm still bound by the rules about. So I'm reasonably confident actually the content of the access talks is rightly not something I can say to the committee, I'm afraid. But yes, they were recorded.
Good. Thank you very much. Order.